We begin this new story with the protagonist, known as Vivian, very carefully sneaking through the garden. She glances around and notices no one nearby, which makes her sigh in relief. This is her chance to escape, but she barely has time to do anything before a voice sounds behind her. She has truly been caught. And she was caught by the second prince of the Astaroth Empire, who is currently the Archduke of the North, a cold and relentless man whose nature is considered closer to that of a beast than a human being. This is Aslan Reshef Astaroth. He asks whether she was looking to take a stroll, because he could have been called for that, and they could have gone together in a pleasant way. The protagonist plays it off, saying he had seemed busy. Even so, Aslan insists that he always has a moment to spare. This irritates Vivian. She had expected something like this, but that doesn't make it any less annoying. She had at least prepared an excuse. She pulls out a letter, claiming it is urgent and from her sister. Aslan remarks on how close the two of them are, yet questions since when the crown prince became her sister. This catches the protagonist off guard. She looks down at the letter, wondering what is wrong with it. She asks herself why, of all things, she ended up with a letter from Johannes and wonders whether she is in a contest with Aslan. As he draws closer, Vivian stammers out a nervous explanation, too flustered to think clearly. Aslan, however, simply takes the letter from her hand and tears it apart. He says it doesn't matter who the letter is from. Aslan touches her face and asks her to return to the room. With a terrifying look in his eyes, he reminds her of the promise she made to spend time with him there. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to cough. Concerned, Aslan asks if she is all right. Vivian says yes, that she is just a little cold. The prince suggests going back inside and resting. He doesn't want her to get any worse, especially with the day they become husband and wife drawing so near. He asks whether she is also looking forward to it. Well, just from the girl's expression, we already have our answer. Either way, Vivian has failed once again, and at this rate, she will never escape from there. If she traces back how she ended up in this situation, everything begins with a poorly written will. As we already know, this is yet another case where the protagonist dies in an accident and somehow ends up possessing a character from a romance novel she read in her previous life. In this story, the descendants of the hero who defeated the archdemon were cursed to transform into beasts. The male protagonist was Aslan, and as a member of the imperial family, he too was subject to the curse. A curse whose bearer, though born human, was doomed to transform into a black lion. To make things worse, his fiancée was unaware of the curse, being solely obsessed with power and good looks. This is the villainess, Vivian Eleonora, and the protagonist had the misfortune of possessing her. If things unfold as they did in the original story, Aslan will eventually grow tired of Vivian's malice and fall in love with her older half-sister, who is the true heroine. Furious, the villainess will try to get rid of her own sister, only to meet her end at Aslan's hands. By some stroke of luck or misfortune, the protagonist at least reincarnated into the character before the two of them had even met. For now, she intends to stay quiet until the right moment comes, at which point she will offer her best wishes to the prince and the heroine as they find love. But there was a detail that hadn't even been mentioned in the story. Vivian was slowly dying of tuberculosis. Sure, she had miraculously been given a second chance, but it was like receiving a car only to find out it had no engine. Things were a little more complicated because nobody was there for the dying woman, leaving her only her inheritance and 1 year to live. At least with that wealth, she wouldn't have to worry about anything, so she planned to spend whatever time she had left doing as she pleased. That was her plan, and so she wrote a letter that read, "If you're reading this, I will probably no longer be in this world. It is better to leave, so do not search for me or wait for my return." She then left all rights to her properties and lands to her fiancé. Vivian intended to spend the rest of her days at a luxury resort, and with that, thought everything was settled as she made her exit. The problem was that right at the start of her journey, she ran into thieves. One of the men taunts her, telling her to consider this her unlucky day. But for Vivian, this barely qualifies as a problem. The protagonist says, "You're right. It is an unlucky day." Drawing her sword, she declares, "Not for me, though. For you." Without sensing the danger and the chaos that was about to unfold, the men simply laugh. Not only does the protagonist have bad luck, it also happens that Vivian is from House Eleonora, the Empire's most prominent military family, and there's no need to say what became of the thieves. Vivian begins to cough, suspecting it was caused by overexerting herself. Suddenly, a growl catches her attention. The protagonist follows the sound and discovers a house in the middle of the forest. Walking further inside, she believes the sound is coming from something hidden beneath a cloth. When she pulls it back, she makes a stunning discovery. There lies a great lion. She immediately notices the black fur and the golden eyes. Without a doubt, this is Aslan. Vivian immediately wonders why he is there, and in his lion form. She thinks it must be because the original plot has been altered. The protagonist grabs an axe that is lying nearby reluctantly since she has no intention of getting involved with him again. But she can't just stand there and watch him die as a beast that can't even speak. And so Vivian breaks his restraints, asking only that he let her go afterward. She collapses to the ground from the effort, her mouth stained crimson, a reminder of the mortal illness that afflicts her. Now free, the enormous black lion approaches in a terrifying manner. Vivian calls out to the prince, asking if he intends to devour her, but the beast only roars at her. But before this outcome, let's go back a few days earlier, to Prince Aslan's mansion. He is in his study when he receives the letter. It is the one Vivian wrote, saying goodbye to him and asking him not to wait for her return, and of course leaving all her possessions to her fiancé. This leaves the prince breathless. Aslan asks, "You interrupted my work for this piece of paper?" The butler simply argues that it is more than just that. But the prince believes it is merely his fiancée trying to get his attention. The older man, however, thinks that this time it is genuine. The butler then reveals that the girl has contracted tuberculosis. This finally gets the prince's full attention. He received this information from the Eleonora household's personal physician, who said the disease had advanced so far that nothing could be done to save her at that point. The butler believes the shock is what made her behave like an entirely different person. Aslan finally rises to his feet. He asks Diego to burn the will, fearing the emperor will find out and use it against him. But as it turns out, the emperor already knows everything and has ordered a careful investigation of Lady Vivian's will. Infuriated, the prince ends up punching his desk. He is stunned that news of the will has already reached the imperial palace, which means the crown prince is already aware. This is bad. Johannes won't let this pass, and will certainly do whatever it takes to place the blame on him. Aslan must act quickly before that happens. He demands that the woman be found immediately and brought back before she draws her last breath. He says that even if it is too late, they must at least retrieve her body. After all, he will have to play the part of a grief-stricken fiancé, and so Diego accepts the orders. As far as the prince is concerned, Vivian has been a nuisance from beginning to end. 5 days pass. Aslan rides alongside his guard, following the trail of his fiancée until it goes cold, leading them to believe she entered the forest. Aslan declares that they must follow. However, one of the guards is wary of the place, noting that the southern forest is dangerous during the rainy season. But for the prince, this is the least of his concerns right now. After all, 5 days have already passed since they began searching for Vivian. He pushes forward and says that if anyone is afraid, they can wait at the foot of the mountain. He continues on, ignoring the calls behind him. Aslan believes she could not have gone far in her condition, so finding her trail should be fairly straightforward. However, the situation is about to get complicated. He is being followed again. He suspects his brother is the one who sent the assassins. Aslan is furious at the audacity of these bastards trying to interfere with him, and in his rage intends to tear them apart. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls to him, but within his mind, Aslan is trapped in a kind of animal aura. The voice says that it is his true self and urges, "Embrace the horrible and bloodthirsty beast you are, and spend the rest of your life drowning in regret and despair." Aslan begins to undergo a transformation. He cries out as the beast takes hold of him. He even tries to resist it. Suddenly, he awakens somewhere else. Not exactly another place, but a memory. He sees a blonde woman asking if he is ending the engagement. The other Aslan confirms it, saying this means she will never become the Archduchess for as long as she lives. Without a shred of emotion, he says, "Remember that villainess of Eleonora." He turns away, ignoring her calls. The woman left behind falls to her knees and begins to cough. As she does, drops of vital fluid stain the floor. Aslan only wants to understand one thing. He demands to know the purpose of showing him these memories. If the intention is to make him feel guilty over Vivian's end, he demands to know what Astaroth wants from him, as if taking his body wasn't enough. Is it now trying to plunge his soul into a pit of despair as well? The voice simply says, "You will regret this day forever." Then a new voice rises, saying it will save him. But Aslan, already transformed into the beast, believes it to be an assassin. Once freed, the Black Lion roars, and is stunned to realize that the one standing there is Vivian. Aslan wonders why she is in a place like this, and even considers whether his fiancée was the one who locked him up there. But he soon realizes that is not the case. Even so, he wants to know why she saved him, which he considers idiotic. She barely has the strength to protect herself. Aslan thinks that now that Vivian has seen him in this form, he has an even greater reason not to let her go. After all, the Astaroth curse is a matter of the strictest secrecy. If Vivian discovers the truth, he will need to get rid of her. But even so, the prince cannot leave her dying alone in this place, and with his enormous mouth, he takes hold of her. Because despite everything, she is still his fiancée. Due to the rain, Aslan heads to a cave to keep them safe. Vivian is slowly coming to. Still with her eyes closed, she can hear the sound of rain, but strangely, she doesn't feel cold. Instead, she feels something warm and comforting, and that makes her awaken completely. Vivian finds herself nestled against the great black beast. She is surprised to find Aslan there. The protagonist is completely shocked, acutely aware of the situation and the place she finds herself in with the prince. She looks at something in her hand, which fills her with worry. It is vital fluid. Vivian goes into complete shock over this, crying out the prince's name. But this time it didn't come from her. It is Aslan who is wounded, so the protagonist bandages him. It's not the best job, but it's enough for the moment. She asks him to be careful with it. Aslan looks so peaceful in his sleep. Vivian, watching him, wonders what kind of person would wound him like this, even if he is a beast, and whether the prince is used to it. And despite the wound, Aslan brought her to safety. The protagonist murmurs her thanks as she gently runs her fingers through his fur. Suddenly, the Black Lion opens his great golden eyes. Under that gaze, Vivian pretends she is checking for more wounds. But while doing so, she thinks that the beast looked at her as though it were a person. She tells herself it must just be her imagination. Setting those thoughts aside, she notices something on him. On the black lion's chest, there appears to be an inverted pentagram. Looking carefully, it seems quite different from what was described in the novel. Vivian tells him she is glad there are no other wounds. But with the ground trembling and rocks beginning to fall, there is something else to worry about. The protagonist stands and asks Aslan to stay there while she checks the cave. But the prince rises as well, and she asks if he wants to come along. In the end, she sees no problem with it and lets him follow her. The two walk silently through the cave. In the meantime, Vivian keeps having a strange sense of déjà vu, and after seeing that mark on the prince's chest, she now knows where she is. This is the Impression Cave, the place in the original novel where the heroine and Aslan connected for the very first time. They were trapped there together due to heavy rain and ended up spending a passionate night, resulting in crimson imprints appearing on both their chests. Through this mark, Aslan is able to maintain his human consciousness even in his bestial form, so there is no doubt that this place is magical. But the question that won't let her rest is, why is it Vivian who is here, and not her half-sister? Vivian finds this all so mortifying. The protagonist thinks that if there's a landslide, both the cave and she will be lost, so she cannot afford any more complications. She is pulled from her thoughts when she hears a voice say, according to the magical instrument, he is definitely in this cave. Vivian stays hidden and listens as they discuss plans to capture someone alive for the crown prince. The protagonist listens to all of this in stunned disbelief. She finally understands who it is that Johannes is looking for, but before his name can be said aloud, Aslan is already launching himself forward. The beast attacks those men who still intend not to harm him too seriously. Vivian watches in horror, thinking all the while that the idiot should be more careful. The protagonist thinks about what she should do, worried that at this rate Aslan will end up in trouble, but then she realizes she has even worse things to worry about. In the midst of Aslan's fight with the men, someone shouts at them, calling them animal abusers. It's Vivian, defending the poor little cat who can't even speak, threatening to report all of them. They finally turn their attention to the crazy woman. Unfortunately for the protagonist, there can be no witnesses. A hooded figure shouts to get rid of her. All Vivian wants is for them to come close to the entrance, and that's exactly what they do. Once they're close enough, she pulls the vine. Everything begins to collapse. Those men scream for help, but it's too late. The beast watching all of this has the most human expression of anyone there. Even as a beast, Aslan worries about Vivian, fearing she may have been caught in it. The protagonist's shadow is finally spotted. Vivian drags herself out, breathing a sigh of relief, thanks to her calculations being correct. The intersection didn't collapse, but she barely has time to celebrate because two of them are still left. She grabs her sword so these poor fools can get acquainted with it. Realizing just how dangerous this crazy girl is, the men simply flee. Vivian lets out a small laugh, but it quickly turns into a disaster as she collapses to the ground after all that exertion. She is very weak, coughing heavily as her own vital fluid spills from her mouth. Vivian realizes she may have overexerted herself. Although she wrote in her will that she was ready for when the end came, she didn't want it to be this lonely or in a place like this. But there is nothing she can do. A gentle hand touches her face. Aslan has returned to his human form, and in the middle of the rain carries Vivian's frail body in his arms. With the girl collapsed in his lap, the prince cannot understand why she did what she did, pushing herself so hard. He vaguely recalls that the Vivian he knew was not like this, since she cared more about power than love, and only looked out for her own well-being. That is the Vivian Eleonora he knows. The question is, why did she stay? But honestly, the prince wished she had stayed the way she was. Because if she had, the blonde wouldn't be constantly on his mind, and he wouldn't feel this overwhelming desire to draw closer. Aslan cannot explain this unbearable hunger or this longing that has arisen within him. And so Aslan asks, Vivian, what have you done to me? He pleads with the girl lying there to at least open her eyes. The protagonist then opens her eyes. Vivian doesn't recognize the place, but it's very elegant, which makes her wonder if she has finally arrived in heaven. Suddenly, something catches her attention. She finally notices Aslan's presence, speaking with the doctor who is discussing her case. The doctor delivers the grim news that the blonde's illness has advanced so far she may not survive more than a year. Aslan only brought him there because he is considered the best doctor in the south. With a furious look, the prince asks if that is truly all he has to say. This makes Vivian think he's going to do away with the doctor, so she tries to interrupt them. The prince's expression changes when he notices she is awake. Confused, Vivian asks him where she is. Aslan takes her hand and explains that this is his mansion in the south, asking her simply to relax. He apologizes for her being in this location and promises that once she feels better, they will go to the capital. Then he surprises her by saying they will marry immediately, leaving the protagonist thoroughly stunned. Vivian shoots up quickly in bewilderment. A worried Aslan asks her not to get up. But the protagonist isn't very concerned about her health right now. She wants to understand what is happening, which makes the prince think she is very eager for that very thing. Aslan tells her not to worry about the formalities, as he will take care of everything, and that all she needs to do is sign this. Vivian takes the paper from his hand, unable to believe he is serious. Her name is there with the surname Astaroth. The protagonist is confused by the situation. After all, she thought he hated her character. Not to mention, she has no idea what will happen now with the female lead. Vivian had even written a will to avoid getting involved with anyone for the rest of her life. But now it seems she is being dragged even further into this mess. She wonders why the prince is doing this. Speaking of him, Aslan assures her there is nothing to worry about because from this moment forward he will always be by her side, so she will no longer be alone as she was before. This truly catches the protagonist off guard, but she has come to understand that this is simply his way of binding her to his side through marriage, even if he doesn't care about her. There is then only one reason Aslan would go this far. She suspects he knows she is aware of the Astaroth curse. That is why the prince wants her close, to keep an eye on her, and she cannot marry him. Vivian asks him why he is doing this. She makes it clear that she doesn't have much time left to live. She reminds him that their engagement was nothing more than a political arrangement, and says that it has become pointless for both of them. Vivian asks to be allowed to spend her remaining days alone. With a frightening aura, Aslan asks why she is saying such things. He assures her she will not die, declaring that he will do whatever it takes to save her. Aslan tells her not to let anyone fill her head with nonsense, and that is terrifying. Someone appears to interrupt them, reminding His Highness that it is time to begin fulfilling his duties. It is already quite late, and Aslan hadn't even noticed. He bids the girl farewell, saying they will continue this conversation the next day. He touches Vivian's face, and she cannot hide how frightened she is. Aslan steps back, sensing that he may have cornered her, and so he leaves, leaving Vivian behind in confusion. The prince exits the room with his head hung low. His state worries the butler, but Aslan tries to act tough, making it clear that there is no reason for him not to be fine. Diego says it's because he carried Vivian all the way there while injured. That is why he is worried. Aslan assures him not to worry, but he is not in the mood to talk about it. Aslan gives him the mission of looking into everything about House Eleonora, including their private affairs. He wants to know why they neglected Vivian to the point of serious illness, and furthermore kept it all a secret. Diego ultimately accepts this mission. Come morning, Vivian is in her room, pondering how everything is happening so suddenly. She wonders if she really needs to rush things. The protagonist laments the end of her dream trip, which was supposed to give her at least a dignified final stretch of life. Instead, she now has to spend the rest of her life there walking on eggshells. She truly has no peace. Her silence is interrupted by someone requesting permission to enter, but Vivian is more surprised by being addressed formally as Madame. The maid is there to bring a message from His Highness. It is a request to join him for breakfast to discuss the marriage certificate. Vivian is shocked that something like this is happening first thing in the morning, but she barely has time to dwell on it because the maid is already getting her to her feet to help her prepare for the day. While her hair is being combed, Vivian tries to understand why Aslan is going to such lengths to save her. After all he had to do was pretend to care. But then Aslan said he would do everything possible to save her life, which makes her recall that roughly halfway through the novel, there was mention of a treatment for tuberculosis. This cure was developed by an acquaintance of the prince, so the only way to obtain it will be through him. But Vivian doesn't know if she will be able to survive long enough until it is ready. That is something to think about later. For now, she is ready for breakfast. The excited maids assure her that since she hasn't fully recovered, they prepared some comfortable clothes. The protagonist thanks them and says they suit her perfectly. They kindly insist on accompanying the girl all the way to the dining room. Vivian follows, undaunted, thinking about what she can do to benefit herself, while also needing to avoid being controlled by Aslan. During breakfast, things started off well. It was surprising that the prince didn't immediately bring up marriage, which was a relief, but she doesn't understand when things shifted. The head chef asks if the food is to her liking. Vivian praises the delicious meal, saying it's been a long time since she's eaten something so enjoyable. The young man took her hand and, with a kiss, promised to do his very best. In a calm but terrifying voice, Aslan calls for the chef. He says the meat is burned, provoking him by asking, "Can't you even properly grill a steak? I'm starting to doubt whether you're really the head chef." The chef immediately apologizes for this mishap. While Vivian is confused, it is simply delicious. But suddenly Aslan announces that breakfast is over and asks everyone to leave, and he uses this opportunity to bring back the marriage certificate. The prince takes the girl's hand, wanting to return to that conversation. Vivian finds this ironic, since by no means is this a conversation. She is practically being forced into it. Aslan draws even closer and apologizes, saying he doesn't want to do this, but he cannot stop himself. And the protagonist even thinks he sounds like a loan shark making this kind of deal. Vivian resists his grasp. She pushes the prince away and elbows him, and she realizes she may have gone a bit too far. Worried, she asks if he's all right. Aslan says he's fine compared to her suffering, but it's obvious he's in a great deal of pain. So Vivian risks asking why he is doing this, when she was the one who had been obsessed with the idea of marriage. But she no longer has that desire and simply wants to spend her last year of life in peace and quiet. She also makes it clear that she will take full responsibility for any problems that arise from their breakup. This is a tactic to reassure him that she will not reveal the secret of the curse. But Aslan completely changes the subject. He also flips the paper over and writes something on the back. When he finishes, the prince says it is a contract in which he swears to use all of Astaroth's resources and intellect to treat her. He promises that if, after a year, Vivian is still alive, she will sign the marriage certificate on the other side. The protagonist wants to know what happens if she doesn't survive, but Aslan is so certain her end will never come. Aslan promises to take every possible precaution to protect her, so she does not die or suffer any accidents. Obviously, Vivian thinks it's a lie, but thinking it over, she knows the prince has had many chances to get rid of her, yet he is working so hard to persuade her. The protagonist believes it's because he cannot easily eliminate her. With that in mind, Vivian wonders whether she should take advantage of this, but at least she thinks she can wait here until the cure from the novel is ready, because she genuinely doesn't want to actually die, and so the protagonist says she accepts his proposal, making the prince flash a brilliant smile. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts entirely, and the protagonist has the feeling that she has become his prey, and so she ended up staying at Aslan's mansion. While sorting through her luggage, the protagonist thinks she must not trust the young man. It is still too early and too difficult to know what he is thinking. So she fears that for some reason she might offend him and he could change his mind. Being no fool, she prepares an emergency bag in case she needs to escape. Suddenly, Aslan appears in her room, giving her quite a scare. Even somewhat frightened, Vivian says she thought they had finished talking. The prince simply says he called for her and got no answer. With that frightening aura of his, Aslan asks why the room is such a mess, as if she were practically preparing to flee. She was caught, but she needs to keep calm. For now, it seems like an innocent question, so she just needs to be good at getting herself out of this. She comes up with the excuse that she is only looking for some clothes to go outside and get a little fresh air, but she doesn't have many options that fit her right now. She explains that given how her body has changed, dressing as she used to is no longer possible. Aslan falls completely silent, making her think it may have worked. The prince covers his face with his hand as if to keep from looking at her and asks if she is having such foolish thoughts, saying it doesn't matter to him whether she's all dressed up because it makes no difference. With some difficulty, he manages to say very quietly that in his opinion the girl is always beautiful. Before the protagonist can question what he said, Diego appears. Aslan asks him to cancel all his plans, announcing that he will go to the city with Vivian. The protagonist is completely stunned by these words. Vivian tries to get out of it, but Aslan is convinced, arguing that she is a patient and cannot take risks. The prince declares that for one day he will be her bodyguard. This is the worst thing the protagonist could have heard. Her plan has completely failed. Without much choice, she accepts, and the two of them go to the city. The moment they arrive, Vivian is completely enchanted by the place. It had been so long since she had gone for a walk like this. But thinking about it, she really never had the chance to live freely. First confined at home, and when she finally managed to escape, she only stumbled from one mess into another. Aslan is at her side in disguise, asking her to be careful because there are many people around. The protagonist confirms this to keep him calm. They spend some time walking through the fair. At one stall, Vivian spots some stones that catch her eye. The vendor asks if she would like a magic stone. Quickly, to her surprise, Aslan says they will take all of them, but Vivian says she doesn't have the mana to use all of that. The prince, eager to spend money on her, even says she can use the stones as souvenirs. Vivian says those are for people who use magic like him, and that there is something more fitting for herself. And obviously it's swords. Honoring House Eleonora, the protagonist picks one up, making the vendor very excited, surely already counting his earnings. He says it was very impressive, but Vivian can only focus on Aslan. Vivian wants to impress him. After all, she is a daughter of House Eleonora, a prestigious military family, and this is her way of saying she will not let him take advantage of her. The girl wants to appear quite intimidating, but when she moves the sword with full confidence and skill, Aslan is actually enchanted. She looks brilliant, exactly as she did before. They are interrupted by a scream. Someone is calling for help, saying they've been robbed. Vivian is torn. While she wants to do something, she is currently in disguise. And besides, she recalls that meddling in other people's affairs hasn't worked out very well for her in the past. Better to let the city guard handle it. But the voice says, he stole my mother's keepsake. Immediately the protagonist moves, ignoring her fiancé's calls. The woman confronts the thief, saying she saw him steal, even as he denies it. He even raises his hand to strike her, but at that moment, Vivian grabs his hand and demands to know what is going on. The protagonist has no time for beating around the bush. She demands he return it, criticizing him for stealing something as precious as a mother's keepsake. He still pretends he doesn't know what she's talking about. Enraged, the man lunges at her. Vivian is perfectly capable of defending herself and finds him pathetic. She even considers letting him land a hit, out of pity. But something startles her, and well it should, because Aslan is absolutely terrifying. Aslan says, "How dare you raise your hand against her? Even I treat her with the utmost respect. Do you think you can touch her with your filthy hands?" The rest of that is history, but that man got his punishment. Vivian returns the stolen item. The woman is extremely grateful, saying it is very important to her. She explains that with it, she will be able to prove to her father that she is his biological daughter, and asks the name of her savior. And of course, once everything is sorted out, the guards decide to show up. Vivian simply drags Aslan away, leaving the three of them behind, stunned. Even after their departure, the girl remains hopeful that she will see her again someday. Meanwhile, the two of them run away. They only stop when Aslan calls her name. Immediately, Vivian releases his hand and apologizes for grabbing it without thinking. But that is not what Aslan is concerned about. He is bothered that she called him by his first name instead of using Your Highness. He tightens his grip on her hand and asks if she can keep calling him that. Vivian turns quite red at the request. The protagonist says his full name, but that's not what he wants. She asks if he wants her to just say Aslan. His smile alone would have been enough to confirm it, but Aslan makes a point of saying so. Still close to her, he asks to go back since it's already getting late. The prince steps away, leaving Vivian behind with many questions spinning in her mind, especially trying to understand this desire for her to call him by his first name. Vivian watches him go and can't help but think that the man is a mystery. Meanwhile, the crown prince remarks on the peculiarities of his younger brother. But now there is something that will keep him entertained for quite some time. Returning to the couple, after that outing, Vivian secretly felt at ease. This makes her think that if every day were like this, she could get through her remaining days there, thinking that she wouldn't have any more problems, at least until that day. At this moment, Vivian is in a slightly complicated situation. She just wants to understand one thing: what is she doing there with the crown prince? To understand that, Vivian will retrace her steps to find out where everything went wrong, starting this morning when she received Aslan's permission to go out. Aslan asks if she wants to go to the bank alone. He confirms it, but already has an escort prepared, even though the girl's idea was to go alone. After convincing him, Vivian finally received her permission and boarded the carriage. The protagonist is alert to everything and quickly notices the coachman is not taking the road that leads to the bank. He makes an excuse about simply taking a shortcut. Soon, the carriage stops and the coachman announces they have arrived. It doesn't take much to realize this is not the bank, and that is how Vivian was kidnapped and now finds herself in the presence of the crown prince. Johannes says, it seems the coachman took a wrong turn by accident. But since you're already here, why not relax and make the most of it? Vivian thinks this is the kind of shamelessness you would expect from the main villain, acting just like in the novel. Johannes Friedrich Astaroth, the first prince, is the main villain and Aslan's adversary. Unlike Aslan, whose mother was an inner chamber attendant, he, being the emperor's eldest son, was the most likely to inherit the Astaroth curse. However, the imperial palace used dark magic to transfer it to the younger one. The problem is that curses are like unpredictable time bombs. No one knows when they might go off. It is a power that could summon demons and destroy the world. So Johannes considers his brother a problem to be controlled. That is why Vivian believes she is there because of this. So she must do everything to avoid falling into his trap. Johannes pulls her from her thoughts, asking if she doesn't find the ocean beautiful. He says he comes to the south often to enjoy the view, as it is a good way to relax. The blonde continues, saying it is a place he truly likes, with a wonderful view, and most importantly, he has gained a precious friend to have tea with. With a gentle smile, Johannes says it is because of her that the place has become even better. Vivian apologizes and says she isn't feeling very well. The prince uses this excuse to say that the imperial family is very concerned about her health. He asks whether she feels she isn't receiving enough attention, making her alert to the possibility that he is testing her. Johannes says his brother is rather negligent for not bothering to take his fiancée to a doctor. The protagonist quickly realizes it is a tactic to drive a wedge between her and Aslan, and in any case she has already signed a contract for her treatment. Vivian says she understands her fiancé, who is simply trying not to abuse his power as a prince for personal reasons. The villain even tries to persuade her, but Vivian holds firm, defending her fiancé, saying that despite the rumors, he is a person of elevated ideals. The protagonist stands ready to put an end to this, but the meowing of a cat catches her attention. Vivian turns around with gleaming eyes, and the prince smiles, saying he has heard the girl is an excellent animal tamer. But this is something the original novel's character was known for. Johannes says the beast in his care has been quite difficult and he truly needs her help, which is strange since the cat is calm in his lap. But that is the problem. It is not this beast that the cruel prince is referring to. He says, "Your fiancé seems to have a great deal of confidence in you. That makes me see you in a different light, Aslan." Aslan is there, saying his fiancé is far too extraordinary for someone like him and that she should not be dragged there against her will. Johannes provokes him, saying to take good care of the girl since it would be problematic if a filthy beast set its eyes on her. Quite cynically, he asks if that's not so. Aslan doesn't respond, but his gaze is lethal toward his brother. Johannes brings the tea time to a close. Very close to the girl, he asks if she will come again next time. The protagonist is shocked by the audacity of making it sound as though she came there voluntarily rather than being kidnapped, and to make things worse, the tension makes her feel ill. Furious, Aslan immediately issues threats. If anything happens to Vivian, he will not let it go unpunished. He promises he will not let him get away with it. Aslan leaves carrying Vivian despite her protests. Johannes stays behind with a smile, lamenting everything and ironically saying he prepared all of that because she likes cats. Recalling how Vivian defended Aslan, he thinks about how she has already fallen for the beast, but to him, the girl is mistaken, because that is nothing more than a beast driven purely by instinct, and behind all his wealth, there isn't a single drop of love. And of course, the prince looks forward to seeing when she finally realizes the truth. He wouldn't miss that for the world. They are back at the mansion. As expected, Vivian is in very poor shape. Her condition worsened due to the exertion. Of course, Aslan blames himself for this and decrees that he will not let her go out alone again. The prince knew something was off when Johannes decided to visit the south for a brief look, but what he never imagined was that Vivian would have his undivided attention. He was consumed with rage when he saw them together, wanting to pit the two of them as enemies. In that moment, seeing them, he briefly considered eliminating everyone to get her back, ensuring the blonde would never see the light of day again as punishment for deceiving him. But then Vivian came to his defense, saying the rumors are false and that the man ultimately has noble and elevated ideals. The girl trusted in him, something he can't even believe she said. Aslan is a filthy beast who says cruel things, like when he declared she would never become an archduchess. He calls her name, then asks Vivian if she doesn't hate him. Before hearing the answer, Aslan simply asks her to forget it. But the protagonist doesn't do that, and is clear in saying she does not hate him. This makes Aslan want to know why. She finds him boring and frightening and obviously won't tell him that to his face. Vivian remains firm in what she said. However, she cannot go further, as she immediately begins to cough. The doctor interrupts the conversation to say that Vivian needs to rest. Aslan leaves the room, thinking about how his fiancée does not hate him, but he still fears what might happen if she learns the truth. He wonders how Vivian would react if she knew her fiancé, whom she so despised, is a beast cursed by a demon. Could she still say she doesn't hate him? At this moment, Aslan feels repulsive. Even as he imagines her face contorted with fear, all he wants is to be with her. A desire to lock her away so that no one can see her except him. Aslan is confused by this longing. These thoughts send shivers through him, but now he understands these feelings. We return to Vivian, still feeling the effects of her weakened health. To make things worse, there is a task force watching over everything because of that bastard Johannes. Thinking it over, Vivian realizes what happened with him before feels strangely familiar. Something similar happened in the novel. Now she remembers clearly. It was the protagonist who should have been in that scene, not Vivian. She finally notices something wrong. Everything that was supposed to be happening with the other girl keeps happening to her instead, as though they have swapped places. If this is not a coincidence, she can already guess what the next event will be. And so a few days pass, and a message arrives from the Imperial Palace. Aslan is stunned by its contents. The protagonist already knows the marriage between them will not be permitted. Aslan says it is a summons from the Imperial Palace calling them to the capital. This infuriates him greatly. Vivian tries to calm him down, knowing the next part of the story clearly takes place in the capital. However, she should be confined to the mansion for her recovery, not stealing any more of the heroine's storyline. She understands this is not a good thing, so she intends to act immediately. But here is where things stand. Inside the carriage, heading to the capital. No matter how the original novel goes, when the Emperor summons you, you go. Vivian breaks the journey's silence, asking if they will go directly to the Imperial Palace. But the prince's plan is to go to Blackford first. That surprises her, since it is Aslan's domain in his northern territory. She simply says she has never been there. Aslan looks at her hopefully, asking if she would like him to show her the place. It doesn't take long before they arrive. Vivian is amazed at how enormous the place is. She remarks that the southern country house was already impressive, but this place is spectacular and far more luxurious. Aslan tells her to get used to it, then surprises her by showing her room. Vivian looks and says something is missing, which confuses him. Then she points out that the wall of her room has disappeared. Aslan's response leaves her quite pale. Wouldn't it be natural for the Archduke and his wife to share connecting chambers? While Aslan is completely unfazed by what he's saying, she thinks the young man really trusts her so little that he needs to watch her openly. As for the protagonist, she is tired and wishes to be alone. The prince regrets that, but asks her to be a little understanding. He doesn't want her to leave his field of vision for even a moment. Aslan holds her face, saying she has traveled a long way and so he will celebrate her first visit to Blackford with a special banquet. He holds her hand tightly as if wanting to prevent her from leaving. Vivian just wants to understand why the prince is smiling when she is dying inside. If she didn't know better, she'd say he is in love. But she knows very well how her character's story ended in the novel. In truth, she shouldn't even be playing around with something like that. Vivian pulls free from his grip and makes the excuse that her hand got sweaty. The protagonist is not going to give him any encouragement, especially when Aslan tore down the wall just to keep an eye on her. As far as Vivian is concerned, there is no way he could feel that way. Aslan leads his fiancée outside. He remarks on how refreshing the night air is, which she agrees with. Deep down, Vivian thinks, first they had dinner together, and now she's been dragged on a walk. All she wants is a little time to herself. On top of that, she has noticed the prince seems to have become more affectionate lately. Aslan interrupts her thoughts by asking what she thinks of Blackford. Vivian is still amazed at the sheer size of the place and also compliments the attendants for being kind, which made the visit pleasant. And here we steer away from the cliché of jealous servants always trying to drive away their master's partner, as if their lord were an innocent child. She comments on the servants keeping their distance from her. Although she has tuberculosis, in this world it isn't contagious. Suddenly Vivian feels the tension in the air, thinking she perhaps shouldn't have said something like that. To break the mood, she says everything is fine, but Aslan disagrees. Aslan says that any form of disobedience directed at her is as if it were directed at himself. After all, he is the second prince and Vivian will be his wife. He says that even with the imperial palace in his way, he will not stop protecting her. This is not at all what the protagonist expected. She never imagined he would become so involved in this arrangement. Looking around, she notices some maids nearby. They were close by, which is why the prince reacted that way when she mentioned those things. But Vivian wants to be fair. After all, she was the one who left a will and disappeared. So she can imagine the political mess the young man is facing, and that makes her feel guilty. Aslan says it doesn't matter what she hears in the palace, asking her not to give it any attention since he will take care of everything. With a tender smile, the girl says he doesn't need to go to such lengths. She also assures him that his sincerity as her fiancé will be clear to everyone, so he shouldn't worry. Aslan is left speechless. Vivian is quick to suggest going back inside since it's gotten colder. The prince simply thinks about how she interpreted his sincerity as merely going to such lengths. He thinks that because of the pain he caused her, it comes as no surprise that it is still too early to win the girl's heart. The two of them head back inside. Vivian is alone in the large bed, but not alone in the room since Aslan is just beyond the curtain. It was the prince himself who suggested it, saying that if she didn't like the connected rooms, she should consider this a reasonable compromise. Now, thinking about the meeting with the emperor just days away, she hopes nothing goes wrong. The night's silence is broken by sounds. Vivian is immediately on alert. She wants to know what those noises are coming from the other side of the curtain. Sitting up in bed, she calls for Aslan. Getting no response, she ventures to go check. When she pulls back the curtain, she is surprised by the scene. Aslan is lying in bed, completely drenched in sweat, one hand gripping his chest tightly, his face contorted in pain. Vivian goes to him, worried, wanting to know if he is in pain. Still getting no response, she wonders if it's because they are in the Empire's capital. Minerva is said to be a sacred place where a hero once defeated the demon Astaroth long ago. So she thinks perhaps the demonic force within Aslan is reacting to the divine power here and hurting him in the process. Still getting no response, Vivian decides he seems stable enough and tells him to stay there while she calls the doctor. But before she can leave, Aslan grabs her and asks her not to go. The prince explains that it has simply been a long time since he's been in the capital, assuring her he will feel better after a few days. He asks one more time for her to stay, especially since he is feeling a bit dizzy. In any case, there is no escaping with Aslan so close, and she even thinks it might be an effect of being in Minerva. Vivian says there is nothing she can offer by being there. Once again, she gets no response from him because Aslan has simply fallen asleep. It is mortifying, and she has no idea what the original novel's protagonist would have done in her place. But she has a vague memory that she sang a lullaby. The problem is that she doesn't know any from this world. But for some reason, she cannot simply leave him like this. This also makes her recall the time they protected each other when Aslan was a beast. And so the night passes, and it isn't long before morning arrives. Vivian wakes to the bright light flooding in and hurting her eyes. She grumbles about still being sleepy, so Aslan beside her asks her to sleep a little longer. This makes her snap wide awake immediately. Vivian leaps up in a panic and asks what he is doing there. The protagonist recalls the last thing she did, which was sing a lullaby. Pulling her into a warm embrace, Aslan confirms it, saying she worked too hard the night before. Vivian finds the situation absurd and asks if nothing happened between them. Aslan smiles and says, "That's debatable," sending her into a panic. Diego knocks on the door, interrupting them. The butler enters with a message, but immediately goes quiet upon realizing he may not have come in at a good time, though Aslan assures him it is fine. With that settled, he announces that House Eleonora sent 2 messages with notice that they need Vivian back at the family mansion. Obviously, Aslan is not pleased to learn that his fiancée is being fetched away like this, without anyone having spoken to him personally. Diego explains that the Duke wants his daughter back home because her half-sister has arrived. Vivian is stunned because Iris is the original heroine of the novel. Receiving that news was like a punch to the stomach. She doesn't even know how to react. Aslan, for his part, orders them expelled since Vivian severed ties with her family long ago. Diego even tries to intervene, saying they are acting on their own authority. But the prince doesn't want to have to repeat himself and orders that if they refuse to leave, they are to be eliminated. With that, Vivian finally responds. The girl thanks him for the defense but says she wishes to see her sister, which Aslan finds strange since they only share half their blood. Vivian explains her curiosity about her sister, and besides, when she ran away from home, she caused quite a bit of chaos. Now she feels she must take responsibility and resolve things properly. Sighing, Aslan says she is far too soft. To everyone's surprise, Vivian invites him to come along, saying that if he shows her father how strong their relationship is, the man won't scold her too much. With a smile, she pleads for him to agree, and of course the prince grants her request. Even in his human form, Aslan can be quite ominous. Just his gaze is enough to make the poor men tremble. To make things worse, he even threatens to tear their eyes out. Aslan makes them nervous, warning them that he will be accompanying Vivian. Seeing that they want to prevent this, the prince issues a basic threat to send their heads to House Eleonora. They are smart enough to make the right choice, and so they travel in the carriage. Vivian asks how he is doing and takes the moment to apologize for asking him to come along. Aslan actually enjoyed it. Now he can see for himself what the situation was like at the Eleonora mansion, and he reminds her that she must be careful not to overexert herself. Vivian is glad everything is going smoothly. If things keep going like this, the two protagonists of the original story will finally meet. Since Aslan is keeping watch, all she can do is wait for them to get together. And she needs to survive long enough for the tuberculosis cure to be developed. For that, she needs to redirect Aslan's attention elsewhere, and involving Iris in that is the right move. In the novel, Iris was so kind-hearted that she pitied the villainess until the very end, so all she needs is to bring Iris completely to her side. Vivian has already imagined how everything could unfold, with the Archduke knowing she knows his secret and trying to eliminate her for it. Her half-sister would defend her, saying that thanks to her they had met and that she would not go around revealing the secret of the curse. And so Aslan would gently listen to Iris. Vivian would be cured and free from the prince. It is a perfect plan. She just needs to make it work. Adorably, Aslan watches her and asks what she is thinking so hard about. Meanwhile, at the Eleonora mansion, the banquet is served. The Duke asks the girl in front of him if the food is good. Iris, his eldest daughter, says yes, which makes him curious about why she isn't eating. She only wonders whether she deserves to be there. He dismisses it as nonsense, saying he is her father and is welcoming her with open arms. Iris says she is happy to be there, but is afraid, since being an illegitimate daughter may bring dishonor. Her mother was one of his attendants, but the Duke loved her with all his heart and still regrets not being able to stay by her side until the end. That is why he wants to do for Iris what he couldn't do for his beloved. Even if it is too late, the girl is still happy to have her father in her life. But part of her heart feels uneasy. When that woman recovered the keepsake that had been stolen from her, she felt so happy and relieved. She hopes she is well. Iris is surprised when her father warns her that Vivian is arriving. She jumps up in agitation over not having prepared herself and decides to eat quickly so she can get ready. Suddenly, her father calls out sharply, saying he already warned her that her sister is just as crafty and treacherous as her late mother. He cautions that there is no telling what harm she might cause, so she must be careful. With all her kindness, Iris doesn't want to think ill of her younger sister and wants to draw her own conclusions. The Duke takes note of his daughter's golden heart, wishing Aslan could see what a perfect bride she is. Iris is surprised, showing which parent Vivian takes after. The father then says he will make her the wife of the second prince before long. But Iris is puzzled by this desire, since she is the fiancée of her sister. Before she can draw her own conclusions, someone interrupts them. The old man is quite rude to his butler, making it clear he is eating. But after the butler begs forgiveness, he explains the reason for the urgency. Vivian is here, but the Duke doesn't care. The surprise, however, is that she has come with the prince. The Duke is utterly perplexed by this news. This infuriates the old man. He cannot believe the prince would come all this way because of her, but thinking about it, this could work in his favor. He summons his daughter. With a smile, he announces the good news that the engagement can be arranged sooner than he thought, and calls her to meet his highness. Meanwhile, the servants politely receive the prince and the lady. Vivian, for her part, is surprised. She never expected to receive this kind of welcome at the Eleonora mansion, and wonders if this is the power of authority at work. Aslan, for his part, is irritated, complaining that everyone was well aware of his fiancée's arrival and yet they rushed to greet them at precisely that moment, calling it insolence. The protagonist goes straight to the point, asking about her sister. She is told Iris is dining with her father and asked to understand that they cannot receive both of them at the moment. Once again, Aslan doesn't let this pass, complaining that they called a sick woman to make her wait. He says Vivian is exhausted from the journey. They are interrupted when Iris recognizes her rescuer there. The girl runs toward her completely overjoyed. Vivian is surprised, but standing before the true protagonist of that story, she has no idea why she is so full of joy or what she is talking about. She doesn't understand why she is being called a savior. Iris recounts how they met in the south, and when she remembers, Vivian is even more surprised. The older sister says she is glad to see her and hadn't expected to find her there. At this moment, the Duke appears. The man simply greets the prince and introduces his eldest daughter. Vivian also proceeds with her plans, introducing the Archduke to her sister and reminding her that it was he who chased away the thief that day. But all that impresses Iris is that Vivian called her by her first name. To the blonde's despair, all she wants is for her sister to keep her eyes on her fiancé. Iris even asks if she can call her by her first name too, and why not. The father is not pleased with any of this and simply says, "Shame on you, Vivian." The furious Duke says that after causing so much destruction to the family and to His Highness with the will, she still hasn't offered a single word of apology. And he says that to set things right, he personally requested His Majesty to dissolve the engagement. This catches Vivian completely off guard. The Duke shouts that this means she will never be the Archduchess for as long as she lives. The other two listen in horror, and Aslan already feels the hatred coursing through his veins. Now Vivian understands the annulment is real and that her own father is behind it. Since her goal is to bring Aslan and the true heroine together, this wouldn't be a problem. But if the bond between them is severed before she has built enough trust with Iris, that will be a problem. And now that Aslan is no longer technically her fiancé, Vivian wonders if he will honor their agreement. But looking at the prince, she can see he is furious. Vivian doesn't understand why he is angry. She is the only one who is insulted here, so she asks him to stay calm. She pleads with him not to make a scene there. Seeing this, the Duke tells her not to cling to His Highness. This chaos quickly becomes gossip among the servants. Iris notices all these people watching the spectacle and asks them to continue in a more private place. The Duke tells her to be quiet and addresses the prince, apologizing for being caught off guard by the sudden news of the annulment. But that is when he begins his plan to propose a more suitable bride. He points to his elegant daughter Iris as the right person to marry. He even asks poor Henry if they don't make a lovely couple. Aslan stares at Iris, who is completely nervous. The prince sighs and says, "Pathetic," leaving the Duke confused and Vivian scolding him. But Aslan doesn't back down, saying he called these desperate attempts to isolate Vivian pathetic. The Duke tries to defend himself, but this time Iris speaks up, taking the prince's side. She knows it is wrong and doesn't want to bring shame upon herself by stealing her sister's fiancé. This provokes the old man's rage. The Duke stares at her and asks if she would defy a royal decree and her father's orders. Iris does not back down. With all his fury, he raises his hand to strike her. Iris closes her eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never comes. Aslan watches the scene in shock. Nothing happened to Iris because Vivian threw herself in front of her and took the slap. The protagonist opens her eyes after receiving the impact, and even so, she stands firm. She will not allow this man to touch her sister, making the Duke even more furious and fueling the gossip among the servants. Vivian says they have simply not yet had a chance to process the sudden news of the broken engagement, and says the same applies to Iris. The protagonist warns that they will soon be meeting with His Majesty to hear a full explanation and politely asks the man to wait until then. She makes it clear that the marriage may have been a family arrangement, but it was also a promise between His Highness and herself. This draws a satisfied smile from the prince. Vivian closes the matter there, exhausted, and says she will only stay for one night. She then leaves, with her own father calling her reckless. As for the slap she received, it is nothing she couldn't handle. She just hadn't expected her dramatic performance to make Iris stand by her side. But it was worth it. Her efforts paid off. Iris follows her, asking if she's alright after getting into trouble again for her sake. She even offers to tend to her wound, though the blonde turns it down. Meanwhile, Aslan stays behind to face his father-in-law. The old man immediately begins apologizing for what happened to his daughter earlier, but Aslan is there to discuss something else. With a smile, he says he would like to learn more about the engagement with Iris. This immediately excites the Duke, who asks Anna to take His Highness to the sitting room, but Aslan quickly declines. This time he wants to choose the location. For him, the ideal place is somewhere with fresh air for a private conversation. Meanwhile, Vivian is lying in bed reading, until something catches her attention. There is a dark-covered book behind her pillow. She picks it up, puzzled by why it would be there. Vivian reads the contents and her eyes widen. It appears to be a diary, describing the death of a maternal relative, her great-aunt who had retired to rest and recover but whose life was cut short by a carriage accident. The girl and her older brother received the inheritance but didn't know who would look after them. Vivian examines the date and handwriting and concludes the diary began when the original Vivian was 10 years old. As expected, it ends with a record of someone coughing up blood. A bitter taste rises in her mouth as she thinks about how that girl fought so desperately against the Duke's cruelty, only to die in the end. That is quite hard to think about, but she is brought back to reality. Something or someone seems to be knocking on the window. Vivian gets up to investigate, even though she thinks it might just be the wind, or perhaps a squirrel, which would be quite cute to see. She opens the window with a big smile, imagining what she'll find. But of everything she imagined, what is actually in front of her never crossed her mind. She is startled, not knowing who the stranger before her is, but it doesn't take long to recognize that this is Alex. Vivian is surprised to see the young man there, having imagined he would be at the academy, but the blonde explains he came to see her. The protagonist asks why he climbed in through the window since it gave her a fright, but he had no choice. Alex explains that if he had come through the front door, he would have been surrounded by servants and dragged to their father. He wanted to see his sister first. He quickly moves past that topic to something more pressing. Almost intimidating her, the blonde asks if there's nothing she wants to say. Vivian tries to come up with something, asking if it's about him being genuinely skilled at climbing walls, which he denies. Alex wants her to be honest about why she didn't tell him about the tuberculosis. The girl hangs her head in shame. He found out through the will and was none too pleased to learn of the illness from someone else. Vivian says she had intended to write to him. In truth, the protagonist was so overwhelmed by the entire situation of possession that she hadn't thought of her brother at all. Alex says she knows the reason he went to study abroad. It was to become strong enough to protect her from their father. The thought alone of her disappearing like that ignites a rage in him. Vivian is moved seeing his reaction. Then with determination, Alex announces he will not return to the academy. This terrifies his sister, since he is so close to graduating. But Alex doesn't care. His sister is terminally ill, and it's by her side that he wants to be. Vivian asks him not to be ridiculous and to go back to the academy, questioning how he simply left in the middle of the semester without a word. Alex assures her he found a way, though it's obvious he left without telling anyone. She apologizes for worrying him, but assures him she is perfectly fine. Vivian tells him it's not as bad as he thinks, trying to persuade him to return to the academy. However, the only thing the blonde can pay attention to is the red mark on her face. The protagonist then tells him everything that happened. Alex is furious at this cowardice. He finally asks if she really let herself get slapped, but Vivian has that confident way of saying she would never let her father defeat her. The blonde asks her to be careful, saying he has a feeling the broken engagement is not the end of this. Vivian tells him not to worry, aware that Aslan is not going to accept it peacefully. The blonde is surprised to hear that the second prince is there. With a smile, Vivian confirms it. She also says that the man doesn't like her very much. The empress, who is trying to make Johannes emperor, has always seen Aslan as a threat, and she was chosen as a fiancé for that very reason. Because being engaged to a woman chosen by the empress must have been insulting enough, and now with it cancelled, she knows he will in no way take this lying down. Not to mention he must be furious at this imperial order. Alex asks if his highness is on the right side. Vivian confirms it, even knowing the prince is watching her because of the curse. Like a good protective older brother, Alex says to let him know if anyone gives her trouble. Even if it's his highness, he guarantees he won't let her be left frustrated. He supposes he could help her escape, and then take her place in disguise, marrying Aslan. The protagonist laughs imagining the scene. She laughs so hard it has been years since she laughed like that. Changing the subject, Vivian asks if he will spend the night there, but apparently the brother's plan was to leave after seeing her. But he can't ignore what's on Vivian's face. So Alex intends to have a conversation with their father. Worried, the girl asks if he's planning a fight. Alex asks whether she'd like that, which she quickly denies. The two go looking for their father and are told the Duke went out with the prince. They are surprised given that the sun has already set, but Vivian immediately recalls Aslan saying he needed to take care of something. She wonders if the young man has something in common with her father. Meanwhile, the Duke and the prince are outside talking. The older man asks him to look upon Iris kindly. Despite understanding his intention, Aslan asks about Vivian, making the other man think he cannot let go of her. The Duke's plan is to marry his other daughter to Lord Nicholas. Aslan's eyes widen because he is the lord of the Margrave of the Borderlands, who must be over 50 years old. The Duke doesn't care in the slightest, saying that His Majesty was very concerned about such a loyal servant to the Empire being widowed. He even has the nerve to say his daughter can dedicate what little time she has left to a meaningful purpose, and that she should consider it a great honor. Aslan thinks about how the man considers himself noble for this, even knowing full well what happened to the women who married the Margrave. And so he feels there is no need to listen to any more of this. The prince says they are about to become family, so they should have an open and honest conversation. The Duke agrees, having sent all the attendants away for this reason. With a smile, Aslan is about to share a secret. Despite saying he is honored, the mustachioed man is scared out of his wits. Without another word, Aslan grabs him by the throat, ignoring his pleas, but this time the old man is lucky. Few people get the opportunity to see this side of him, the dark side of the demon Astaroth. A scream is heard. Fallen to the ground, the Duke cries out for someone to help. Transformed into the beast, the Black Lion uses his heavy paw to strike him. The Duke, remorseful and terrified, begs for mercy. But Aslan finds it pathetic. The pain the man is feeling is nothing compared to what he put Vivian through. And so we learn how the information Diego gathered about House Eleonora came to be. He was very careful in collecting everything, and thus delivers the papers to his master. In Aslan's hands, the case of the poisoning of Duchess Eleonora. The former Duke had only one daughter, but due to her fragile health, she couldn't take on great responsibilities. Even so, the father couldn't ignore his daughter's talent for politics, entrusting her with real power while searching for someone else to hold the title in her place. He brought a simple young man from a distant relative to join the family as a son-in-law. This person is the current Duke and Vivian's father, but the poisoning of the Duchess was only the beginning. Now his next target is Vivian. The physical and mental abuse from the Duke, the public defamation, the theft of her inheritance, and the neglect. All of this bitterness seeps from the beast's mouth, having avenged his beloved for all this time. After reading that report, Aslan understood all of Vivian's actions. Her desperation to preserve the engagement, and her decision to become a villainess. But the prince is merciful, and will give this cursed man one chance to redeem himself. Pressing his paw down on the Duke's hand, Aslan demands that he immediately go to the Emperor and request the cancellation of the marriage annulment. With a bloodstone in hand, he says, "Unless you want the nightmare you just witnessed to become reality, The Duke is astonished to still be alive, and Aslan reminds him he has been given a second chance. He explains that what happened was merely an illusion he created with the magic stone. Aslan makes it absolutely clear that none of it was a lie. This makes the Duke think the only explanation that makes sense is that the Duke, meaning Aslan, is a demon. He immediately concludes it must be the demon of the Astaroth legend. He risks asking why he is doing this. What could he possibly gain from a girl like Vivian? This only deepens the prince's irritation. Aslan asks, could that pathetic mind of yours even begin to consider how much she has dominated me? With her very breath down to the marrow of his bones. The prince declares that he belongs to Vivian. Morning finally breaks. The protagonist notices but is far too drowsy and reluctant to get up. One of her hands touches the soft mattress, and she finds it strange. Vivian's eyes fly open as she wakes abruptly, only to find Aslan beside her. The moment the young man opens his eyes, she asks when he arrived and of course wants to know what he did the night before. Aslan says nothing, only pulling her into a warm embrace and asking her to come closer, complaining about the bed being so small, and she gets that feeling again, that this has happened before. Taking advantage of the moment, the protagonist brings up the subject again, wanting to know where he was. Even as the prince assures her he was taking care of business as he'd said, she asks if it had anything to do with her father, but Aslan conveniently doesn't respond because he has fallen asleep. Someone knocks at the door to deliver Vivian's medicine. She allows them in but quickly remembers the state of things and tries to fix this mess. It's too late and Alex is already inside the room. Vivian's eyes go wide as she's caught in a difficult-to-explain situation. Alex turns pale and drops the tray. After that mortifying morning, they meet and apologize for what happened. Aslan assures him it is fine. After all, the blonde couldn't have known he would find him in his sister's room. Alex smiles, thanking him for his understanding, and introduces himself properly. The only thing the prince is thinking is that after all that time away, the blonde has now decided to act like a brother to Vivian. Alex, for his part, has his own criticisms, thinking that after ignoring her for so long, the man before him has suddenly decided to play the role of the concerned fiancé. But the two of them seem to accept each other, even if only superficially. Vivian breaks the tense atmosphere to remind them she is also there. Aslan announces they will be staying a few more days since Vivian seems to have a lot to talk about with Alex. And also because the blonde hasn't yet had the chance to get to know her sister. But his next words are more shocking. He says the Duke left for the Imperial Palace the night before. Aslan says the man went to request the engagement be reinstated, as convincing the Emperor should be a little easier. Which isn't a lie. Vivian doesn't fully buy those words, imagining her fiancé must have done something terrible. The prince falls into thought, recalling that since he went looking for Vivian after she ran away from home, he has managed to remain conscious even under the curse. Now he can even control when the monster is unleashed, so he imagines there must be a cause for this. Aslan thinks that perhaps the reason is Vivian. It's all he can think about when he looks at her. Seeming to sense the gaze upon her, Vivian turns around. Aslan is there with that smile. Then Alex breaks the moment, saying he is surprised their father changed his mind. Without the Duke there, he decides to act as the host of the house and is ready to guide them to breakfast. The blonde is just a little clumsy, not even knowing where the dining room is, but Vivian wants her fiancé to understand he has only just arrived back in the country. One of the reasons Aslan asked to extend their stay at the Eleonora mansion was that her condition had slightly worsened. Vivian thinks about how His Majesty was kind enough to say she could go to the palace after recovering. Because of that, the protagonist should certainly feel relieved, but in truth, she can't stop worrying about what might come next. She knows that in the original story, the true protagonist went to the palace and ended up being terribly humiliated by the Empress, but the details are a little hazy in her mind. Considering how everything that was supposed to happen to the heroine keeps happening to her instead, as if they've switched places, Vivian wishes she could remember more to find a better way to handle things. Until then, she intends to simply enjoy the good things like breakfast alongside her older sister. Aslan is happy watching the interaction between the two of them. He calls for Dylan, who is standing nearby, and asks the young man to bring what they discussed earlier. With that order, Dylan leaves. Breakfast ends and Vivian is coughing due to her delicate health. She also refuses to stay in bed, complaining about how suffocating it is to be inside the house all day, not to mention that thinking about the Empress is giving her a headache. Aslan then turns to Alex and mentions having heard that the blonde trained in swordsmanship at the academy. He suggests a duel to see his skills. Even looking a little nervous, Alex accepts. The prince invites Vivian to watch the duel. The protagonist is thrilled. Iris and Vivian are seated, watching the young men clash swords. The older sister reacts to every move. Vivian, for her part, is mesmerized by the clash of blades. Watching something so exciting is sweeping away all the stray thoughts in her mind. She only regrets not being able to participate, but at least seeing them so full of life is giving her energy. Looking more carefully at those sparks, it seems they are putting in a little too much energy. Meanwhile, Aslan tells the young man his strikes are not bad at all. Alex brags that he is the top of his class at the academy. The prince says, "I imagine that's why it took you so long to come back." Alex retorts that it is the bare minimum for someone in his position. Iris is excited. Even though she knew her family was a noble house of great swordsmen, seeing it with her own eyes is breathtaking. Her comment displeases Vivian, who realizes her sister still has no interest in Aslan. Iris says she is jealous of them for not having the motor coordination to do such things. All she has been doing is staying in her room and reading. Vivian says that if she keeps reading and learns magic, she will be able to fight. She stops speaking when something catches her attention. She remembers from the original story that the place where the original protagonist encountered the Empress and was humiliated. It all happened because a bookcase collapsed due to faulty construction and nearly crushed the Empress, who then blamed Iris, who happened to be nearby. This sets her mind working. Vivian wonders whether she could actually prevent a tragedy simply by not going to the Imperial Library. It was obvious from the moment she was written into this story that fate is simply following her. This makes the situation complicated. Vivian doesn't know what to do, but she doesn't even need to worry about it just yet, because the moment simply transforms when her illness decides to make itself known. Even absorbed in the fight, it doesn't take long for Aslan to drop his sword and rush to her side, worried. Both he and Alex run toward her. The two of them wait outside, worried about Vivian. Aslan, having just stepped out of the room, reports that the doctor said she needs to rest, though since the man wouldn't stop talking, he can't trust him very much. The prince doubts the doctor examined Vivian properly and is not at all convinced she will receive all the care she needs. All Alex can say is that this is his fault. He says he went to study abroad for his sister's sake, but in the end, that decision only made things worse for her. She probably hid the illness because she didn't want him to worry. Alex is completely ashamed of himself. Aslan stares at him but says nothing. His thoughts are on Vivian and how she is always so selfless, and he thinks that perhaps it was this very quality that made him fall in love with her in the first place. The prince does not want to see her suffer anymore, and so he silently pleads for her to wake up, because there is something he would like to give her. At this moment, Vivian awakens in her room, immediately hit by a coughing fit. She thinks about how painful it must be to die in prison. What's funny is that she was already prepared to die, and yet now she is doing everything she can to survive. And thinking about it, things never worked out when she tried to run, but when she faced things head-on, somehow she managed to get through. Suddenly, Vivian wonders if she couldn't turn this crisis into an opportunity. She was so caught up in her plans that she forgot she was alone, until the maid calls her name. Vivian asks her to pass a message to Aslan. Tell him to trust me no matter what happens. The maid did as she was asked. But Aslan immediately suspects that Vivian said this to reassure him, or he thinks that perhaps she has momentarily forgotten that there is no one as principled and strong as Vivian. The next morning arrives. Iris is very worried, but Vivian assures her she has recovered from what was making her sick and is feeling better. The protagonist asks the girl if she is worried about her health. Of course she is. Iris says she was so frustrated that there was nothing she could do and mentions that Alex cried a great deal. The boy immediately silences his sister, embarrassed to have that side of him exposed, and a small heated argument breaks out between the siblings over Vivian having lied about how she was feeling. She apologizes, explaining she didn't want to worry him again. Alex throws himself into his sister's arms, asking if she knows how worried he was. Meanwhile, the prince simply watches everyone hovering over the girl, looking a little uncomfortable. Aslan interrupts them, wanting a minute alone with his fiancée, and the two of them are shown out without further ceremony. Finally alone, Vivian asks what he needs to discuss. Aslan surprises her by asking her to close her eyes for a few minutes. Even without knowing what he intends, Vivian does as she's told. The prince then draws close to her. Aslan is so near and asks her to finally open her eyes, and so Vivian does. The protagonist is surprised by the beautiful necklace around her neck. Smiling, Aslan says he thought it would suit her and asks if she likes it. Vivian finds it so elegant, and even more surprising is receiving it on no particular occasion. She thinks Aslan might just be performing courtesy, and yet she realizes he is nothing like how he was described in the original story. Thinking about how the prince even goes along with things when she asks with a pitiful face, albeit reluctantly, she concludes that in the end, the young man is not such a bad person. Vivian intends to keep playing this game, at least until she is cured. So with a tender smile, she compliments the necklace. Her smile grows even more radiant, and it seems to affect Aslan. He averts his gaze and says, "You are always testing my self-control," revealing that he can't take it anymore. Hearing this, Vivian worries whether she said something wrong. She needs to fix this quickly, and explains she was talking about the necklace, then says she is grateful he came as her companion. Vivian thanks him because thanks to him she faced her father and was glad to see her beloved family again. And she confesses that when they returned to the mansion, she said she was fine, but in the end, she really was feeling a little lonely. While Vivian laughs, Aslan reaches out again, touching her face. He brings them even closer. Vivian is left speechless. She only said that to smooth things over. She is certain the villainous Eleonora also wanted this kind of happiness. The character had nothing after her tragic death in the original story. Vivian wonders whether, now that she possesses her life and can bring her story to a close, that might in some way be a consolation. Her first act is to throw the book into the fireplace. Alex is beside her, watching the item catch fire. He then calls her by her mother's name and makes a proposal. "Do you want to run away with me?" Vivian is surprised by such a sudden question, but Alex denies that's what it is. He says he has been thinking about it for a long time. He says his academy is well known for medicine, and if they ask, they might even be able to get help with the illness. Alex also says he doesn't care about the family, as long as his sister gets to live. Besides, where they are is Eleonora. They are home. Vivian thanks him for all his concern and everything he is willing to do, but she wants to stay. She tells him that His Highness has promised her a cure for tuberculosis, so they don't need to worry. Alex is astonished that his brother-in-law actually said that, and Vivian suggests that if he doesn't believe her words, he can ask him directly. She also says, besides, Eleonora was left to us by our mother, so we must protect it until the end. A faint smile crosses Alex's face as he thinks of the woman. She tells him to hurry up and graduate so he can come and have her as a student. Alex ends up agreeing, but like a good older brother, he says to let him know if His Highness gives her any trouble. Soon the pleasant time at the mansion comes to an end, and she and Aslan depart for the Imperial Palace. Iris chose to take etiquette lessons at the mansion, and Alex also stayed behind, saying he had matters to settle regarding their father. Speaking of that man, Vivian had completely forgotten about him. Vivian even comments that she can already imagine the kind of attack he will launch, but Aslan reassures her that will never happen, which makes her curious to understand why. Getting no answer, she assumes the prince means Alex will handle it. Meanwhile, from his palace, the emperor says, Aslan, I showed mercy, and yet you dare use me in Astaroth? He crushes a brooch in fury at this ungrateful beast, and promises that when the young man arrives, he will make him pay. Returning to the couple, Aslan tells her everything he discussed with her father-in-law, including the plan to marry her off to the Margrave. He assures her she doesn't need to worry about it. Aslan also says that Lord Nicholas will be removed from his position soon, so the marriage agreement will be annulled. This surprises Vivian, that a man of national merit would be stripped of his position so easily. The situation is rather confusing, but if Aslan says it's fine, she'll have to take him at his word. Besides, Blackford's intelligence network is unbelievable, so she hopes Aslan will also place all his trust in her, and she is still there because she needs to save the life of the Empress he despises. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly, but just as Aslan guaranteed, she was no longer being negotiated into marriage with the Margrave. He had, after all, lost his position due to accusations of treason and, as expected, paid for it with his life. Vivian still wants to understand about the engagement annulment, but she doesn't have much time to dwell on it, since the Emperor has called for her. He dismisses her so he can speak with the prince alone. As she steps away, Vivian thinks about how the Emperor's expression is not at all pleasant and wonders what he wants to discuss with Aslan. She knows from the original story that Aslan suffered severe abuse at the Emperor's hands during his childhood. The protagonist wonders if it is safe to leave the two of them alone, but there is not much she can do aside from complying with the Emperor's order. Besides, Aslan gives her a reassuring smile. Vivian casts one last look at him, and the door closes. Vivian gives herself a few light slaps on the face just to stay alert. She has bigger things to worry about. She is about to be accused of attempting to eliminate the Empress. So before that happens, she needs to save her, and she needs to be quick before it is too late. Meanwhile, the discussion between father and son is somewhat heated. The Emperor is far from satisfied with the audacity of removing a genuine national hero from power. Even after receiving a blow, Aslan doesn't flinch. He says they were also not satisfied with the expansion of the Margrave's own faction. He also says, even if I had acted, had you ignored it and kept him in power, he would have remained there. This does not calm the Duke's fury. He says he has been too lenient for far too long. Like a proper tyrant, he demands his son kneel, and in his hand is a whip. Aslan is unfazed. His gaze remains calm, and so he kneels as demanded. The Emperor soon unleashes his fury with the first blow. Aslan endures it as though accustomed to this pain. Beyond the physical violence, there is also the psychological, the Emperor saying he is truly ruthless. With an unwavering smile, Aslan says, I am deeply honored, Your Majesty. The Emperor continues to strike. The crimson mark of his crime stains the red carpet. His father demands he explain what happened with Duke Eleonora. Aslan asks if the man said nothing. The Emperor says the man showed up in absolute terror, begging to reinstate the engagement with his daughter, and furthermore confessed that he had been threatened by the demon Astaroth. In a grave voice, he asks, did you exploit the power of the curse? But Aslan says nothing. This only intensifies the Emperor's rage. He demands to know the reason Aslan is so obsessed with this marriage. Even without saying a single word, it radiates from his entire body and mind. It is because he loves Vivian, but he cannot get through to them. Both his father and his father-in-law are cut from the same cloth. Aslan knows that if he is to persuade them, he must speak in terms they understand. So his answer is, I saw potential in Vivian. Of course, the Emperor doesn't believe this right away, questioning what a girl dying of tuberculosis could possibly offer. The answer is surprising. She has the power to suppress the Astaroth curse. The Emperor asks if he is certain, and Aslan confirms it, saying that his fiancée may be the only one who can finally put an end to the curse. And he says that claiming this power entirely for the imperial family is necessary in order to weaken the Eleonora faction. The Emperor asks, you are saying you learned this important truth only moments before her approaching death? But the prince insists Vivian will not meet that end because he is doing everything to save her, and so Aslan asks for the engagement to be reinstated because Astaroth needs her. Meanwhile, Vivian is at the Imperial Library, having arrived before the Empress, so she has to act as if meeting her were a coincidence. She knows that preventing the woman from entering the library is out of the question, as that would make her look even more suspicious. According to the novel, the bookcase that collapses is in the magic books section, so it turns out her only option is to lure the Empress away from it. Thinking about all of this gives the protagonist a headache. It would be so much easier if the solution were in the story. She even regrets not having pretended to be sicker and stayed locked in the prince's mansion. Her mind is in shambles when a voice behind her calls her name. Vivian recognizes it. When she turns, standing there is the Empress. She greets Her Majesty. The older woman says nothing, her eyes busy scanning the girl from head to toe, noticing that she looks more fragile than the last time she saw her, as well as the worry clearly stamped on her face. Her health is obviously deteriorating, and the signs can't be ignored. She wonders why it is only now that Johannes has taken an interest in a girl like this. The Empress finally says something, asking if she is going to the library and telling her to feel free to look around. Vivian says, "If you are here to look at magic books, please be careful," which obviously draws the woman's attention, wanting to understand why. This is what the character says in the original story, but obviously our protagonist cannot make that same mistake and say it. She knows the cause of the accident is the shoddy construction, but with her limited authority, she can't find any evidence to support it, so she will have to come up with an excuse. Vivian says, "I've heard that accidents frequently occur in areas where magic books are kept due to residual mana, so I humbly offered a word of caution." Someone appears, interjecting about accidents. A young man steps forward, assuring her that no such accident has ever occurred in the Imperial Library since its inauguration, and suspiciously adds that the only way he can see something like that happening is if someone set a secret trap. Vivian simply says she was looking out for Her Majesty's safety. The Empress is also brief in her declaration, thanking her for the concern but making it clear it is none of her business. Vivian grows frustrated, realizing this will not be an easy mission. Still not giving up, the protagonist slips between the shelves, observing everything that happened and noticing something strange. In the novel, the bookcase collapsed suddenly, yet it doesn't look unstable enough to do that on its own. So Vivian wonders what the exact cause was, and then she realizes she is not alone in that space. She asks a maid if she is looking for a specific book. The woman replies she is trying to find the book Her Majesty mentioned, but she is not familiar with advanced magical languages. And to Vivian's misfortune, she doesn't know any either. Even so, the protagonist offers to help. At the same time, however, she scolds herself internally. She doesn't have time for this. Suddenly, an electrifying energy hits her while searching through the books. Vivian is surprised. Is that magic? Is it just static electricity or residual mana? But nothing beyond that happens, and she assures the maid she is fine. She then finds the book the maid was looking for. The maid is very grateful for the help. The woman soon leaves, watched by Vivian, who didn't even think to peek at what the book was about. She is preoccupied with trying to understand what kind of strong static electricity that was. Suddenly, she remembers something that happened before, back at the market stall with the prince. The moment she touched a stone, that same shock hit her and made her recoil. Aslan quickly took her hand and explained it was an explosive magic stone. Once mana is introduced, it detonates after a set period of time. He said it is so powerful that even someone with no mana can feel a sting upon touching it. Of course, the prince scolded the vendor for not putting up a warning sign. Now things are perfectly clear in Vivian's mind. She asks herself who could bring a mana stone into the Imperial Library. Meanwhile, the Empress picks up a book and asks who found it. The maid says it was Vivian, and Her Majesty asks to be shown where it was. They make their way to Vivian. The protagonist immediately despairs at the possibility of what is about to happen. The moment the Empress draws near, energy begins to flow among the magic books. Vivian immediately shouts not to come closer. The Empress finds this strange, but there is barely time for her to wait for the blonde's explanation. The bookcase begins to topple over, and perhaps it is already too late for anything. Or perhaps not. In an act of courage, Vivian throws herself forward, saving the Empress. The woman is terrified by the scene. The bookcase simply crashes down before her eyes, terror running through her entire body, and the two women are safe. Meanwhile, the maids rush to Her Majesty, utterly horrified. Vivian beside her asks if she is all right. The woman appears to be in shock, not understanding what happened. Everyone helps the Empress to her feet, and one of the attendants is ready to call a doctor. Before she can do so, the man behind her asks them to wait. He notices a peculiar glimmer on her skirt. The young man wants to take a look before letting her leave, to know what it is. But even with evidence flickering right before everyone's eyes, the attendant insists it is a mistake, and that there is nothing in her pocket. But then explosive mana stones are retrieved from her, and she demands to know what these things are doing in her pocket. With that, the man takes the liberty of calling the guard and says, "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I believe this was not an accident. The attendant is accused of attempting to harm Her Majesty with a magic stone. Even with the evidence, the woman continues to firmly deny having done such a thing." Vivian stares at the Empress while everyone's attention is on the maid, which means she doesn't need to worry about taking the blame for what happened. However, Vivian senses something that doesn't quite add up. If the woman was the culprit, why didn't she flee immediately? Many things don't fit, and they can't simply be ignored. It's like when the original heroine was falsely accused in such an absurd way. The Empress orders the maid taken to the torture chamber. Vivian takes the liberty of announcing she has something she wishes to say first. She explains that handling such a powerful explosive stone with precision requires magical skill, and says the maid doesn't even have knowledge of magical language. The Empress permits her to go on with her explanation. Vivian then begins to recount how the maid was having trouble finding a book because she was not familiar with advanced magical language. But she then noticed that the title on the note was simple enough for even her to recognize. Vivian says that someone who cannot even tell the difference between basic and advanced magical language would never be capable of handling a magic stone like this. The man draws her attention, asking if she is certain the maid wasn't simply pretending, and besides, if that's true, why would the stone be in her pocket? But that is something Vivian cannot explain. The girl says it is strange the woman didn't run. Instead, she went directly to the Empress, carrying obvious evidence in her pockets. The man says nothing. This makes Vivian suspect that perhaps he is the real culprit. Since managing magic books requires knowledge of magic, he is the only person who meets the criteria, but accusing him directly would solve nothing and would only cause problems, so she must be more careful before addressing this. Vivian says that what truly needs to be examined are the remnants of the magic stone that knocked over the bookcase. She says that if they can trace the residual magic from the stone, they can discover the person who tried to harm Her Majesty. The man asks how she plans to do that. It's a simple method. Someone who is not the owner of this mana must touch the explosive magic stone. Vivian places the fragment in the maid's hand, demonstrating the kind of rejection reaction that occurs, but if it were the culprit, nothing would happen. He says it's quite impressive. Though once a magic stone is used, its mana will dissipate in a matter of minutes, which won't give enough time to identify the culprit. Vivian agrees with this. She says the culprit, being proficient in these arts, must have thought the same, and therefore didn't bother retrieving the fragments. Drawing near to him, the girl says, "Am I not correct, Chief Librarian?" The man immediately asks if he is now the suspect, and she denies it. However, Vivian takes his hand, leaving him without a reaction. The mana fragments are placed in his hand, and just as expected, nothing happens, leaving Vivian certain of what she suspected. Everyone around them is surprised that the stone did not react. The man says she seems to have considerable knowledge of magic, but Vivian makes it clear she doesn't know very much. She replies that she merely learned a few things by watching and listening to Archduke Astaroth. While the conversation unfolds, the Empress keeps her gaze fixed on her future daughter-in-law. The man admits he had not expected this, that he ended up underestimating her. After the commotion, the maids begin to clean up the mess. Vivian asks Her Majesty if she is all right. The Empress seems a little bothered. She even starts to think she may have gone a little too far. She did accuse an administrator of the Imperial Palace of a terrible crime. Vivian finds herself so reckless, thinking she should have kept her mouth shut until leaving the Imperial Palace. The Empress questions why she is there alone, since she heard she had come with Aslan. The protagonist explains that out of concern for her health, His Majesty permitted her to leave early. This makes the Empress think that as someone facing a terminal illness, she understands how precious time must be for the younger girl, and even so, she did not hesitate to save her. The Empress asks Vivian to raise her head, and declares that she will continue to observe her, and with that she leaves, leaving the blonde confused. After all, what does observing her mean? Then the Empress clarifies, she will be watching to see whether she behaves appropriately or not. Now Vivian has two pairs of eyes on her. She gives a nervous little laugh, saying she has quite the overactive imagination. Meanwhile, Aslan walks through the corridor with an escort. Suddenly, he feels his heart beating harder than usual, which makes him bring his hand to his chest. A voice provokes him, saying it caught the scent of vital fluid somewhere nearby. Johannes provokes him, saying of course it came from his brother. While Aslan keeps a lethal stare, the blonde wears a sarcastic smile and says, "Seriously? I'm hurt. We meet again after so long and you greet me with such a frightening look." Aslan goes straight to the point, asking what he wants. Johannes subtly says he was simply worried. He says, "What kind of older brother turns a blind eye when his younger brother smells so strongly of blood?" It is inevitable for Aslan to buckle in pain. Johannes says he made this mess with his reckless use of the curse, and now has the audacity to dump the consequences onto someone else, and questions how far he intends to dishonor the imperial family. But Aslan is unshaken. With a smile, he says his brother is hardly in a position to talk, and provokes him by saying letting others do the dirty work has always been his specialty. The two brothers continue their game of provocations. But they are soon interrupted by a voice greeting the crown prince. When they turn, standing before them is Lady Vivian. She had a bad feeling and so she came running to check, and she can see that Aslan looks worse than before, making it clear something serious has truly happened. Johannes gives a beautiful smile, asking the girl if she is feeling better since the last time they saw each other. Vivian confirms she is. This pleases him and he laments, saying he has not felt at ease since the way they parted. Now that she has finished her business, the blonde invites her to his palace, offering his hospitality. Aslan immediately steps forward and declines the invitation, which makes his brother, in a rather childish manner, say, "I asked Vivian," but the dark-haired prince holds firm, saying his fiancée is too considerate to refuse requests even when she knows she cannot fulfill them. Vivian watches the two bickering brothers without patience, ready to step in between them. She apologizes, declining the request and explaining she still has matters to attend to, and says that the next time an invitation is extended, she will gladly accept. The prince regrets it and promises to send a formal invitation another time. Before letting her go, Johannes calls her name and remarks that she seems to be getting along well with Aslan lately. Johannes starts his little game, asking if she is aware of her brother's true nature. Aslan is in complete shock, as is Vivian, who didn't expect such an audacious question. The protagonist doesn't understand why he asked that, and thinks the blonde suspects she has discovered something about the curse. Vivian needs to say something quickly, but her mind has gone into complete meltdown, and that is terrible. Johannes doesn't even wait for her answer. With a smile, he says he was simply thinking about what they could discuss over tea, and that it will be fun if the topic is her fiancé's childhood. Without further ceremony, the crown prince bids the girl farewell, promising to invite her soon. Vivian is still in shock, and the only thing on her mind is that the blonde is a complete bastard. The protagonist understands that Johannes is determined to drag her to ruin since the last time, and what is mere entertainment for him is a matter of life and death for her, because one wrong step and Aslan will eliminate her. Suddenly, her fiancé's voice in her ear makes her body freeze. Vivian gives a nervous little smile, saying the crown prince is quite mischievous, but she is immediately surprised to see her fiancé lower his head. And that is when she notices a crimson stain on his clothes. It is raining heavily outside. The couple is alone without anyone else's interference. Meanwhile, Vivian asks how someone could do something so terrible to another person. Aslan simply sighs, saying he is fine and that this is something he is used to. Now Vivian understands that the bad feeling she had earlier was right, which is why she can't help feeling guilty. For now, all she can do is what she can. So she asks Aslan to remove his shirt. While gathering some medication, she explains she is going to treat his wounds, and promises she won't call anyone. The dark-haired man says nothing, but his small smile already shows he is grateful. He then surprises her by inviting her to remove his clothing, though the prince quickly resolves the misunderstanding, explaining that it hurts with every movement, so he can't do it alone. Vivian does it, quite nervously, especially since accidentally touching the wound would irritate it, so she is careful, removing things one by one. Aslan also seems nervous about the situation, and perhaps the air between them has suddenly grown warm. As she undresses him, the protagonist realizes it is worse than she thought, and suggests calling an imperial physician, but the dark-haired man stops her, saying she is enough and that he doesn't need anyone else. This makes Vivian realize he is more on the defensive than usual, though she thinks it's probably because everyone there simply attends to the crown prince. Vivian is ready to disinfect the wounds. As she cleans them and notices her fiancé's quiet sighs, she asks him to be patient, assuring him she will be done soon. In the middle of all this, Aslan says out of nowhere, "It seems I only ever show weakness in front of you." He asks why she isn't tired of being by his side. Vivian asks him not to say that. Everyone has moments of weakness, and in times like these, it is right to accept help from others. The girl also knows that somehow Aslan's lonely and difficult childhood echoes her own, so she knows what it is like to try and endure everything alone. And it is for that reason he stirs even more pity in her. Aslan asks if she will continue to stand by his side. While embracing her, he wants to know if she will stay with him even though he is imperfect. Vivian confirms it and thinks that for now, this is what she needs to do. She realizes that what the prince needs most is reassurance. And she knows that once they return to Blackford, things will go back to how they were. Vivian thinks he will forget all of this, won't he? After all of that, we learn of her father's fate. He disappeared one night without a word and was eventually found in the mountains but lifeless. The cause of death was ruled an accidental fall, and his funeral was held privately with only close family present. No one risked shedding a single tear. For Vivian, something about his passing doesn't feel right. Her brother, who had planned to return to the academy, suddenly inherited the title of Duke, which left him completely bewildered. Fortunately, Aslan, with his wealth of experience, offered generous support, allowing the succession to proceed without complications. As for Iris, she was also officially added to the family, so overall, things turned out well for everyone. Yet it seems she was the only one whose life continued to spiral. As she runs, Vivian wonders why she is suffering like this. But to understand what truly left her in this state, we need to go back to the morning of the day before, when she was standing before the mirror being prepared by the maids. That was when something caught her attention. There is a strange mark on her chest. She turns to Emma, asking if she can see a white mark on her chest, but the older woman cannot see anything. Vivian thinks the color must be too faint for others to see, but what interests her is understanding why it is there. The protagonist recalls that a similar mark exists in the original novel, though the color and shape are different, and it was so dark that Iris had to wear dresses that covered her entire chest. Her own mark, however, looks more like the one she saw on Aslan back in the cave. She is curious whether the young man knows about the mark, not that it would change anything. The problem is she cannot ask about something so suspicious. Vivian laughs, thinking it's silly to dwell on this. From the open door, she hears voices saying, "I trust the matter is being kept under wraps." Yes, we also have a constant watch on any strangers who approach. Dylan, speaking with the second prince, asks if he is certain whatever the matter is. The guard says he understands his intention, but still thinks it is imprudent. Then he says something that shocks Vivian. In the worst case, Madame may die. The sound coming from the door catches their attention. Dylan immediately opens it, asking who is there, but no one is there. Luckily, Vivian managed to hide in time, and she hears Dylan return to the room and report that it was nothing. Now that she can breathe a sigh of relief, she wants to know what they were talking about. She wonders if Aslan has finally decided to get rid of her. She did not show kindness to him expecting anything in return, but how could Aslan forget everything she has done? The protagonist lets out a heavy sigh. After all, she thought they had grown a little closer at the mansion, but it seems she was far too naive. Now she will have to deal with this pentagram without the prince knowing, so she has no other option but to find him. She needs to find Jesus, the arch-image of the original novel. He is the master of the Mages Guild, the one who helped the heroine awaken her powers, and who likely knows something about the pentagram. Jesus is a mysterious man who is difficult to track down, but she at least knows where he is, thanks to the original novel. So getting to him won't be the problem. She just needs to wait for a chance to go out alone. The next day soon arrives. And of course there was absolutely no chance he would let her go out alone, especially remembering when she was captured by Johannes. It's just a normal outing, but Aslan is in uniform with his sword and that frightening look on his face. To make things worse, Aslan says he has reserved the entire place they are going, so no one will be there to bother them. At least the silver lining is that they are near Jesus's guild. An opportunity like this won't come twice, so she needs to lose him. Vivian says there is a shop she would like to visit and asks if he would mind if she went alone, but of course Aslan refuses, arguing it isn't safe and says they will go together. She prepares the ground by saying it is a little embarrassing to go with a man. She says it's a lingerie shop, leaving the Archduke completely frozen. Aslan says he has not been as attentive as he should and asks her to go ahead. Vivian is delighted, informing him they will meet at the restaurant in 20 minutes. The only thing she hadn't counted on was that the maids had also accompanied them, but it was too late for Aslan to inform her of that. His fiancé had simply vanished. Vivian catches her breath after running so much, but at least she has made it to the location. And just as in the story, the sign marking the place is a deep petrol blue. She enters. At first glance, nothing in the shop stands out. But she knows this is the Mages Guild, where illusion is natural, and anyone who judges by appearances will certainly be deceived. The hooded figure who appears behind her says this is no place for a respectable lady and asks if she is lost. He gives a confident smile, and Vivian returns it, knowing she has truly come to the right place. This is Jesus in disguise. Luckily, the protagonist knows how to make him reveal himself. All it takes is singing the lullaby of the Empire. Vivian begins. They say the devil appears on the night of the red moon. With a smile, Jesus continues. So whatever happens, do not open your eyes. Suddenly, a ray of light from him strikes Vivian, making her close her eyes. The master of the mages says she is not one of them, then asks what brings her there. Vivian is surprised that the moment Jesus's transformation occurred, everything around her changed. But she goes straight to the point, asking him to look at the magic circle on her body. Jesus immediately finds it strange, saying he isn't sensing anything about it, until his eyes go wide at what he witnesses. He asks what kind of unbalanced magic this is, and makes it clear this is worse than he imagined. Jesus says it is very powerful black magic. It is so powerful that when activated, it will destroy her, exploding her heart. The mage notices that she doesn't seem very surprised, since news like this normally sends people into hysterics. Even though she appears composed, Vivian is panicking inside, but she responds that her calm comes from the fact that an arch-image like him would know the solution to this. Jesus says she is very clever, and fortunately he has good news. First, the magic circle is incomplete. They usually appear in deep red, which is not the case with hers, so if he dismantles the formula first, he should be able to resolve her problem. And of course, Vivian asks him to hurry, but there is a second thing. Jesus explains that the magic circle is keeping the tuberculosis in check and being possessive in nature. This seal does not like the idea of its host dying from anything other than itself. With a smile, the mage lays out the two options, death by tuberculosis or death by black magic. Even so, Vivian asks him to destroy the formula, promising to pay whatever reward he wishes. Jesus loves hearing proposals like this, but says money is not his only motivation. What he truly wants at this moment is the pure blood of an Eleonora. He asks if she agrees, even though it means hurting her. Vivian imagines the mage knows something about her blood, but the girl has no time to hold back when it comes to something like this. The protagonist cuts her hand with a dagger, giving him all the Eleonora blood. She places it in the cup on the table and asks if that is enough. Obviously, the master of the mages is awestruck by that crimson cascade in his goblet. The man laughs, saying how courageous she is. But that is a good thing, because now he has an idea. Vivian is running through the streets after he cast a healing spell on the wound, and she doesn't want to risk Aslan noticing it. Jesus warned her that deciphering the formula would take time, and irritatingly asked her to be patient. Everything in her life is such chaos. Meanwhile, Aslan is waiting for her at the restaurant, just as she had arranged. Dylan asks if he is worried, and the dark-haired prince shoots back asking if he looks like he is. The guard ventures to say that when he smiled earlier, he looked very threatening. The young man says everything will be fine, saying the prince worked so hard practicing that dance he taught him. Dylan holds a rose between his teeth, saying to approach Vivian with the seductive shoulder dance, and then hold back the rose as if about to give it, leaving her in suspense, guaranteeing it will be a successful proposal. Looking miserable, Aslan asks if he is certain that Vivian likes that kind of thing. Dylan says he asked her about the dance, pretending it was for a friend, and the blonde commented that she found the effort thoughtful and liked it. So he guarantees it will be a success. Even so, Aslan is worried, thinking about his beloved. He knows Vivian is still hesitant about the engagement, but he could no longer postpone things. Even after consulting with the most renowned physicians, her illness is not improving, so the only way to keep her alive by his side is through an impression. Once the ritual is complete, the bond causes the magical beast and its companion to share a single life, meaning Vivian cannot die before him. At the time, the two of them were discussing this, and Dylan was concerned that if his master were to die, the same would happen to Vivian, which is something risky. Aslan knows the young man is right. With so many enemies around him, he cannot deny that this is an imprudent choice. But he can no longer stand by with his arms crossed and watch Vivian endure everything alone. That is why the engagement ceremony must be carried out as soon as possible. Aslan is startled by a voice that appears. Vivian is there and apologizes for being late. Noticing the girl is out of breath, he asks if she ran because she didn't want to make him wait, and says he should have gone to fetch her. Vivian says she is fine, but Aslan knows she isn't, and asks her to sit down and rest. And of course it doesn't escape his notice, the bandage on her hand. Taking her hand, he asks about the wound that is emanating mana. Of course he was going to notice, so she needs to come up with a lie. Vivian starts by saying that on the way back, a woman stopped her and asked for help, and she ended up getting hurt in the process, after which the woman healed her with magic. Aslan wants to know what happened. Vivian is caught off guard but immediately says the woman was being courted by a man with a terrible dance and asked for help hiding. The protagonist says it was so awful when he advanced dancing with his shoulders and then pretended he was about to give her a rose before pulling back, calling it completely absurd. Vivian expresses pity for the woman and says that in her place she would have run off on her own. Of course that deadly aura rises, which Dylan feels. But soon Aslan breaks the tension by calling her name and asks if she is really telling the truth. The atmosphere turns terrible. But Vivian doesn't lose her shine. With a big smile, she says she is telling the truth. Aslan asks if that's really all, and in the end he accepts the answer. He says he'll order the meal, and meanwhile Dylan is having a breakdown, which does not go unnoticed by Vivian, who doesn't understand why the young man is being escorted out. But the prince says it's just a problem they are dealing with. Despite everything, her outing with Aslan ended with a surprisingly tranquil meal. And before Vivian even had time to catch her breath, the winds of a new season began to blow, and so a letter addressed to both of them arrives. The introduction states that a summer hunt organized by the crown prince will take place over several days in the sacred forest. Therefore, the presence of both of them is requested, which will bring great joy to the imperial family. The protagonist crushes the letter, imagining this to be Johannes's scheme. And seeing that it will be held in the sacred forest, Vivian thinks the blonde has finally gotten what he wanted. This is a sacred place where the first emperor was buried, a private location that has never been open to anyone outside the imperial family. The problem was that the sacred forest was imbued with an anti-demonic power, making it the worst possible place for Aslan, who carries the Astaroth curse. Speaking of him, the dark-haired prince asks if she is all right since she doesn't look very well. He even suggests she should have stayed home, but Vivian is so considerate, saying she couldn't be so far from him. The truth is that only the protagonist knows that since Aslan has no alibi, he ends up being unjustly accused. Knowing that, she can't stay at the mansion. The cure for tuberculosis at stake. The carriage stops and it is announced they have arrived. The moment Vivian looks outside, she is awestruck. This truly is the sacred forest. It makes Vivian feel as though even breathing is easier, as if its anti-demonic effect is relieving the symptoms of her tuberculosis. And this is her chance to move forward. But first she needs to keep Aslan away from the Empress, so she announces she will go to her chambers and that they will meet later. Before she can disappear, the prince stops her. Aslan pulls her close and asks if she will give him a good luck kiss. Vivian is immediately flustered, asking what he is talking about. That's when she looks around. All the other girls are giving their loved ones a good luck kiss. She realizes simply walking away would be embarrassing for Aslan. In that case, she has no choice. Vivian draws close and kisses Aslan on the cheek. The prince is quite flushed. It is the summer hunting season and everyone is loving it. After that, the two of them part ways. Vivian wishes him good luck at the hunt. Aslan takes her hand, places a kiss on it, and declares that he will repay her support by winning the finest game of this tournament. Vivian immediately realized the dark-haired prince knows this tournament is a trap set by the crown prince, and even so, he is being so gentle. She smiles, eagerly awaiting for him to fulfill his promise. Meanwhile, the girls are assigned to their lodgings. The place is enormous. It used to serve as a mansion, and everyone not taking part in the hunt must gather there. Vivian looks around, searching for the empress. She doesn't find her, but overhears something among the girls that catches her attention, that Countess Amelia has decided to participate in the hunting tournament this year. Vivian is completely stunned. The protagonist looks at the redhead sitting and being attended to by a maid. She is the true culprit in the novel, the one who attempts to poison the empress and frame Aslan for it. What's worse is that the redhead doesn't even try to be discreet, which is the kind of audacity one would expect from the emperor's mistress. Fortunately for her, things seem to be developing exactly as in the original story. At this rate, without a doubt, Amelia will slip the poison from the note into the champagne and deliver it to the empress. So the protagonist's plan is to pretend she found the maid and secretly swap the glasses before everything happens. After that, she will need to slip away discreetly. Her thoughts are interrupted by the announcement of Her Majesty and the Crown Prince's entrance. The woman greets her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. Vivian politely greets the royals. Obviously, she finds it strange that the woman approached her first. They converse casually about the hunting tournament, and Vivian explains she is only there to watch. Johannes, with his gentle smile, finds this idea wonderful, which leaves her confused. The heir explains that by coincidence, his mother's maids will not be participating in the hunting festival, and says that if Vivian stays by her side instead, he would feel more at ease. Vivian says that while she may not be enough, she will attend to Her Majesty with the utmost sincerity, but the look she receives from the Empress is not a very pleasant one, and it is rather strange that the maids are not accompanying her, especially at a moment like this. The Empress says she doesn't look well, and reveals she has summoned an imperial physician to examine her. This makes Vivian find her actions strange, until she remembers that the last time, in the library, the older woman declared she would be observing her. The protagonist imagines the physician was summoned to see when Aslan's fiancé will finally pass away, since she's been taking longer than expected. Now thinking about it, Vivian recalls that in the original story, the true heroine was also deeply humiliated by the Empress in this same place, and this makes her wonder if something terrible will also happen to her. The man introduces himself as Pablo, and requests permission to listen to the sound of her lungs. Obviously, Vivian intends not to allow this, and while dealing with that, she remembered Amelia, noticing she was no longer there. The maid is heading toward her direction. At this rate, it will be impossible to swap the glasses. The situation is even more complicated than she imagined. On one side, she is the target of the imperial physician, and on the other, the maid is approaching the empress. Now she is in trouble. Now she doesn't know what to do. Vivian has to think quickly of a way out of this. Pablo's voice catches her attention, and looking at him more carefully, she notices something shiny in his pocket. This immediately makes her wonder if she should use it. It can't hurt to try, so she takes the tweezers and asks why something so sharp is necessary. A little nervously, Pablo explains it is simply a medical tool used for respiratory treatment. Vivian asks if he intends to stick it up her nose. The physician says that while it is a little uncomfortable, it doesn't hurt, to which the girl retorts by asking what happens if it does end up hurting her. This little game of hers is enough to draw everyone's attention, and she intends to take her performance as the villainess to a new level. Vivian understands that if she cannot stop the poisoning alone, then someone else will have to do it. The protagonist calls for the maid carrying the drinks. She pulls the woman aside, asking her to hold the tweezers for just a moment. The maid explains she must bring the champagne to Her Majesty, but Vivian makes an excuse. Just a few seconds, long enough to confirm the tweezers are truly harmless. She intends to use the artifact her brother commissioned, which has the power to determine whether anything nearby could cause her harm. Meanwhile, the other ladies comment that the villainous Eleonora is back in action after a long period of quiet. The protagonist at least ensured that everyone saw she didn't so much as touch the glasses. With the artifact in hand, she is ready to find out. As a powerful light strikes, the maid begs her to let her go. Johannes is also there, watching the whole spectacle. Both he and the others are impressed by what is about to happen. Even Pablo is mortified, because this is supposed to be impossible. But everyone witnesses the stone turn black, which means something is wrong with the tweezers. Pablo immediately grows nervous, saying this cannot be right. There must be some kind of terrible mistake. He reminds them that the girl herself said the artifact determines whether something nearby is dangerous, and argues it shouldn't have reacted to his tweezers, implying the danger is elsewhere. Meanwhile, the maid is very nervous and tense, still held by the blonde. This doesn't go unnoticed by the physician. He draws everyone's attention, calling the girl suspicious, as is the champagne she is carrying. Feigning innocence, Vivian wonders aloud if something is wrong with the glass. Pablo suggests they take a look. The protagonist is willing to do so, and says the artifact is reacting more strongly to the champagne than to the tweezers. Now everyone knows they whisper that the glass was poisoned and was about to be brought to the Empress. Johannes approaches and orders the maid to be restrained. He volunteers to interrogate her. The maid is taken away, screaming that she was framed. For Vivian, this situation has been more or less resolved, but there isn't much she can do now except look for a chance to get out. She spent more time there than she intended, and according to the novel, Aslan's demonic energy went out of control around sunset. So she needs to stop him from entering the first emperor's cemetery before that happens. But just as she is about to make her escape, Johannes appears right behind her, saying he is impressed. Vivian practically freezes, then turns with a hollow smile, greeting him. Johannes says she not only thwarted the poisoning attempt, but also pretended it was a coincidence in order to pass the credit to someone else, all while humbly stepping aside. But this was already expected from the protagonist. She knew it wouldn't be so easy to fool the main villain. She realizes it is probably wiser to be straightforward at this moment. Vivian then apologizes, but the blonde asks her not to be nervous, assuring her he knows she is not the guilty party. Johannes says it is a shame she is far too good a woman for his brother. This leaves the protagonist confused, but Johannes simply turns away without another word. Vivian doesn't know what to make of it, but she has no time to waste. She runs, watched discreetly by Johannes. The blonde gives a malicious smile, knowing the girl is heading toward Aslan, and so she will soon find out she is nothing more than prey. Meanwhile, Aslan is galloping. He is going too fast, and the people chasing him are nearly losing him, but they need to capture him alive. To make things worse, Aslan feels that strange palpitation in his chest. This has been happening ever since he touched the relic, and he cannot control his demonic energy. Although he had fully prepared for the anti-demonic effects of the sacred forest, he never imagined they would go so far as to use the first emperor's sword, a sacred relic, against him. Johannes is clearly desperate to capture him. Aslan continues his escape, but as time passes, he can no longer endure it. He falls to the ground. In his current condition, he can't go on like this. The only option is to hide. Aslan sees that there are two paths ahead. One leads deeper into the forest. The other leads to the sacred resting place of the first emperor, permitted only to direct imperial lineage. If he can't shake them, he will have no choice but to go there. But the problem is that enduring the powerful anti-demonic effects of the cemetery is already difficult enough, and he will end up roaming as a beast for a long time. As he considers these consequences, his thoughts turn to Vivian. He had promised to see her soon, but the plans had to change, and this will take a little while, and so the prince takes the form of the beast. Meanwhile, Vivian is galloping fast. The protagonist is in a hurry. The sun is about to set, and there is no sign of Aslan. If things happen as in the novel, Aslan will lose control of his demonic energy due to Johannes's trap. And if he transforms into the Black Lion in front of his loyal subordinates, he will have no choice but to eliminate them himself. So Vivian has to do everything she can to prevent that tragedy. Suddenly, something catches her attention. She pulls the horse to an abrupt stop. There are clear footprints of a human and an animal, but the girl goes pale when she notices they are heading straight for the path that leads directly to the Emperor's cemetery. With that, Vivian hurries to reach him as quickly as possible. The protagonist finally arrives where the first emperor was buried and laid to rest. Walking through the grounds, she thinks that if Aslan is truly in there, he must have transformed into the beast and lost his reason, so she must be very careful. A sound catches her attention. Vivian looks toward the thicket from which it comes, and from the shadows, wild eyes watch her. The protagonist feels her blood run cold, and barely has time to react before the great black beast leaps toward her. All she can do is scream, expecting her end to be getting devoured alive. But then nothing happens. To her surprise, Aslan is simply standing beside her, like a kitten when its owner comes home. He even lies down on the ground as if expecting her to pet him. Vivian is confused about what he is doing, wondering if it is some kind of pre-meal ritual. To the girl, it seems like nothing but a display of cuteness. But it's none of that, and the protagonist soon realizes that Vivian's special ability to tame wild beasts must have been activated. Vivian even starts rubbing his belly, relieved to have been saved by it. As if things couldn't get any worse, rain then begins to fall. The first thing is that the girl feels cold, and the water begins to fall harder and harder, and she has no idea what to do. The sun will set soon, and it will only get colder. The beast watches her as if understanding everything. He tugs at Vivian's clothing. Vivian quickly understands it is a sign for the two of them to take shelter. But the problem is that only direct descendants of the imperial family have permission to enter. It is very clear that the Black Lion wants to take shelter from the rain. However, the divine power inside is so strong that it would end up harming him. That's why she wants to think carefully about another place. But it seems Aslan has a plan. The lion steps past her, carrying her stolen sword, heading toward the entrance of the place. Vivian chases after her stubborn fiancé, in the end accepting the idea of staying there for just a brief moment. A torch is lit, driving away the darkness. Since it can't illuminate everything, Vivian asks the lion to stay at her side, and so the two of them walk together. Meanwhile, Vivian is awestruck. She can hardly believe she is personally seeing a place she only ever read about, and it is far more spacious than she imagined. She also feels warmth, as if it were radiating from within. After walking for some time, Vivian finds something and cannot resist the urge to touch it. This is the first emperor's burial chamber. Aslan's roar echoes through the space, startling Vivian. When she looks, the lion appears wilder and more aggressive. But when she looks at his mouth stained with vital fluid, her worry shifts. The protagonist is concerned because his health worsens suddenly to the point of bleeding, and at this moment she thinks she should never have entered even with Aslan insisting. Vivian is sorry about it and suggests they leave immediately, offering the lion her support as he leans on her. The girl tries to help them get out of there, but something is still wrong with the beast. He pulls away from the blonde roughly, and as a consequence, he catches Vivian's leg with a cut from his sharp claws. The black lion looks at her. He seems to waver and pull back from the girl. Vivian quickly realizes it may be because of the wound and tries to reassure him that it can be healed with magic. The protagonist tells him not to worry, that it is not serious, but Aslan continues to hesitate, as if afraid that even his breath might hurt her again. Even so, Vivian is patient and manages to coax him a little closer. And the calm look on her face turns into a grimace. The approaching black lion looks even more ferocious. Vivian carefully calls out to the great black lion as if trying to awaken his consciousness, but the girl is in complete panic. As it happens, the prince inside the beast is conscious and knows that if things continue this way, he will only end up hurting Vivian more. He slowly backs away so as not to startle her. Then he flees despite Vivian's cries. But the protagonist doesn't give up and goes after him, noticing the lion is heading straight for the burial chamber, which makes her think he is panicking, and so she goes in search of him. Without either of them knowing, the two of them are being followed by guards. Meanwhile, Vivian finally reaches the chamber, calling out for the lion, but she is quickly struck by something strange about the place. Ever since she was outside, she hadn't felt anything, but now she is overcome by a feeling of dread. Her gaze is inevitably drawn to the symbol above. That emblem is unmistakable to her. It is the symbol of House Eleonora, the sword that defeated the devil. This symbol was bestowed as a mark of honor upon its founder, a woman who was once a companion of the first emperor. She was the only one who trusted the emperor and fought by his side. Seeing this symbol engraved above the burial chamber, Vivian wonders whether the emperor wished to remain with his companion even in death. The protagonist places her hand on her chest, confused by the feeling that rose up inside her. She knows this pressure is not from her tuberculosis, and thinks she may simply be feeling sad because she is standing in front of someone's tomb. Soon footsteps are heard approaching, and it is Aslan. She says, "I'm glad you came back. It's quite suffocating in here, isn't it?" With a smile, she tries to persuade him to leave, but she falters when the ferocious lion suddenly charges toward her. Without realizing it, those two guards were right there. Vivian hears the order to attack the beast. She has no idea what is happening, but hearing that they must keep him alive, she already figures these men are from Johannes. She also realizes they must have followed her, and of course Aslan was clever enough to notice and thus saved her. This is the impression cave again, but this time something will be different. Vivian as an Eleonora draws her sword and charges toward those men, with a battle cry telling them to get away from the kitten. The first one who attacks her, she easily dodges him and disarms him, then delivers a brutal blow, leaving the others frightened, wondering why they didn't take care of her first. They had no idea she could fight like that. The order changes to eliminating Vivian. Aslan will not allow that to be carried out. The third man, the protagonist, handles easily as well. Vivian understands that Johannes is doing all of this out of fear of Aslan. The fact that the Astaroth curse was transferred to her fiancé also means he has the power to resurrect the devil. So if the crown prince were to eliminate Aslan, he would only inherit the curse for himself. That is why he wants to capture him with black magic and lock his brother away like a walking corpse. Just thinking about it enrages her. Her fiancé did nothing wrong. Aslan never even wanted the throne for himself. Even Blackford, built by him and his comrades, came about simply through his desperate struggle to survive. And so Vivian lets her sword fall. She appears a little lost amid the bodies. The more she thinks about it, the angrier she becomes. This special power apparently was not unique. Suddenly, she is surprised by Aslan nudging her with his muzzle. She pets him, glad he has calmed down. Vivian promises she will no longer try to rush him out of there, knowing how stubborn he is. But she warns him this is not a good place and says that even though it is dark and rainy outside, he should think carefully about this. And she promises that even so, she will stay by his side. Out of nowhere, Vivian begins to fall before the great black lion's eyes. And of course, Aslan is in despair. He has a flashback to that day in the impression cave. Even unable to speak as a human, Aslan pleads for her to open her eyes. But looking more carefully and with his ears alert, he soon hears a sound. Vivian has simply fallen into an unexpected sleep. The black lion watches the sleepy girl on the ground. Realizing he can bear it, he decides to stay there for the night, since Vivian is exhausted. Vivian speaks in her sleep, saying she tamed a lion and will use it to boast to Alex. Without realizing it, Aslan has already returned to his human form. Aslan places a delicate kiss on her cheek and says, "I'm sorry, Vivian, but I don't think you'll be able to brag about that." The curse broke sooner than he expected. Aslan smiles tenderly, watching her sleep. He knows it was thanks to the girl. The unbridled curse must have calmed because of her, and that is because she forgave him and did not give up. Aslan touches her hand. Vivian is so small and delicate. He was afraid of hurting her, but at the same time he longed for her not to pull away, so he couldn't bring himself to run. This makes him feel selfish. After hiding his true nature and causing her pain, he still craves a deeper connection rather than being content with just this. The truth is that Aslan wants her whole heart. He wants to go as deep as possible. He is so sorry for everything, especially for knowing that one day he will have to part from her because she does not belong to a monster like him. Even so, Aslan cannot bring himself to let his beloved go. Morning soon arrives. Vivian is already on her feet, yawning to shake off the last of the sleep. She stretches and remarks that her ancestors must have been watching over her because she managed to sleep on hard stone and everything felt so warm and cozy. Finally back with the group, she finds the others gathered and talking. However, she cannot see Aslan. He had already left by the time she woke up. Her concern is that his body hasn't had enough time to fully heal, but she hopes he is all right. Then her eyes light up when she spots something. Aslan has finally returned. Vivian immediately goes to him, thrilled that he is well, but before she says something foolish, she stops herself. After all, she needs to pretend she doesn't know he transformed into a black lion. She improves her approach, asking where he has been all this time, since she spent the entire previous day looking for him. Aslan begins to lament and says he will not offer an excuse. The prince notices the wound on her thigh and asks if she is all right. Vivian finally remembers the wound and says she must have fallen while looking for him in the night, and asks if he knows how to use healing magic. Aslan simply declares that he will learn, much to her dismay, but luckily he still has something that might be useful. The prince tears off a strip of fabric from his clothing and wraps it around the wound to prevent infection. This is only a temporary measure. Aslan finishes the bandage, done in such a thorough and careful way. This makes Vivian think that even though he wasn't conscious in his black lion form, he may know on some level of lucidity that he caused this wound. While the prince still holds his hands on her leg, she can't help but feel ticklish. But soon Aslan is done and she thanks him. He helps the girl climb onto his back to carry her back to the carriage. Vivian says she doesn't need him to do that. She could perfectly well ride a horse. But her fiancé simply reveals that he lost the horse. Aslan admits that he makes mistakes too. He is still human and admits he seems to make even more when she is around for some reason. The young man says he couldn't keep his promise to her yesterday and even made her wander alone through the forest. And so Vivian holds on tightly to the young man. She knows that everything that happened, from being afflicted by the curse to becoming a magical beast, was not his fault. Meanwhile, Aslan says he holds a secret she can't even imagine, and that is why he was late. But before he can say anything further, Vivian interrupts. And what of it if you have a secret? She says that if it's something that hurts him, there's no need to reveal it, because sometimes keeping it hidden for a while is the better choice. And she offers great advice. Perhaps if it is hidden long enough, the lie might end up becoming truth. Aslan says she is very strange, even as he seems a little grateful, and says the girl seems to know exactly what he wants to hear. Instantly, Vivian turns red, thinking she dug too deep. She demands he pick up the pace. They head to Aslan's temporary lodging. Vivian is lying in bed while she hears her fiancé shouting orders to call the imperial physician and prepare a hot bath for her. The protagonist breaks the moment by commenting that this is not the inn where she is staying. Aslan retorts, "No, this is the inn where we are both staying." The problem is that if she doesn't return to her lodging soon, her brother will worry, and for all she knows, he may already be looking for her. But this bed is so soft and comfortable, truly worthy of the imperial family. She only feels sorry for Alex because she will be staying a little while there with Aslan. Suddenly, Vivian comes back to reality. She asks if he is truly saying they will be sharing this small room for the entire week of the hunt, sleeping, bathing, and changing together. Aslan says he couldn't bear to have someone as frail as her sleeping in an outdoor lodging, and suggests that if she is uncomfortable, she can sleep on the sofa. Vivian thinks Aslan could have kept this room to himself and still handed it over to her because he was being considerate of her medical condition. She just ended up speaking without thinking. The protagonist apologizes, saying she didn't mean to be so guarded around him and that he obviously also wants to take a bath. And even so, he gave her the room regardless. Aslan interrupts her, saying not to worry about him and that she should simply be comfortable because the room is large enough for 2 people to live in. Aslan says this while they are so very close, their faces nearly touching. The Archduke calls her name. Holding her chin and making her lift her gaze, Aslan asks if this arrangement is acceptable. Even she admits the place really is large enough for 2 people, so looking away, she agrees with him. But Aslan still makes it clear that if she feels uncomfortable at any point, she can simply tell him. And even while saying this, the prince remains in the same position, not even moving away from above the girl. The 2 of them stay like that, until there is a great commotion outside. Then Alex barges in, held back by guards, asking if it's true about the engagement being cancelled. Once again, Alex finds the 2 of them in an awkward situation. The moment of embarrassment passes, and the protagonist asks what he is talking about. Vivian truly knows nothing and asks her fiancé what he is referring to. After all the confusion, the whole problem is sorted out. What is known is that Aslan was planning a marriage proposal without her knowledge, and he had intended to do so with the rose dance and shoulder move that Dylan had mentioned once. Vivian nearly has a breakdown over this, but Aslan says he intends to explain it better. Even poor Dylan tries to resolve the situation, only to be told to stay out of it, while the protagonist is completely furious about having nearly suffered the greatest humiliation in the Empire's history, and so Vivian simply asks her brother where their lodging is. Alex grows concerned since it's quite a walk to get there. The protagonist leaves, taking Dylan's broken heart with her. All that preparation for nothing. To make things worse, his master comes up behind him, calling his name in a terrifying way. Aslan says it seems he has been letting him get far too comfortable. And so Dylan screams his apologies. After that incident, the fourth day of the hunting tournament begins. A small gathering takes place at the Empress's lodging. Johannes tells his mother she seems to be in a wonderful mood. The Empress laughs and says, "Just as you said, I think I am feeling quite satisfied. She is this way because she finally managed to get that girl Amelia, who had been annoying her, out of her sight." The redhead thought herself so powerful simply for being the Emperor's mistress, but everything was ruined by Lady Vivian. The Empress gently sets her teacup on the table and bitterly recalls her daughter-in-law. At first, she had thought her nothing more than a spoiled young woman who relied entirely on her family's prestige. She had thus dismissed her as a proposal for Johannes and handed her to Aslan as if granting a favor, because she never imagined the girl would prove herself so talented and humble. As if reading her thoughts, Johannes remarks, "You must have come to like Lady Vivian as well." Almost invisible, but there a small smile on the Empress's face. She says a doctor from a foreign country has discovered a cure for tuberculosis, which the blonde already knew, revealing he had tried to make contact with the man. The Empress laughs and says she hopes this news makes the girl happy. She also advises her son to build a friendship with the Duke, as it will be a good way to recruit House Eleonora to his side. She calls for her maid Sarah. The Empress asks her to bring Vivian in the most respectful manner. The weather is quite sweltering. Vivian looks miserable as she drags her feet. It is an unofficial rest day during the hunting tournament, and she hadn't expected it all to be summoned by the woman. The protagonist recalls the Empress mentioning the doctor with the tuberculosis cure, but at least Vivian already knows this is where the chapter of the false doctor begins. This was the greatest deception in the Empire's history. Even the original Vivian had placed her hope in this false doctor as a last resort. However, when the truth came to light, she went mad with despair and took her rage out on the poor innocent Iris, even attempting to hurt her with a sword. But before the tuberculosis could bring about her end, it was Aslan who did it, brutally. In other words, this is the last chapter in which Vivian is still alive. She is starting to shiver for no reason. Although she knows Aslan would not eliminate her right now, it is still unnerving. While lost in her thoughts, Vivian is surprised when someone taps her on the shoulder. It's Aslan, and she jumps in fright. The young man explains he called her name several times and seems to feel guilty for having startled her. He apologizes for appearing so suddenly and changes the subject, saying he heard the Empress called for her. Vivian immediately notices from his expression that the fiancé seems worried, though he also seems to simply be acting hospitable. And despite that, she feels a little bad about the situation. It is also irritating that Aslan planned such a proposal without even asking her first. But she doesn't hate him, and not knowing the reason for that worries the protagonist. She even starts to wonder if it's because he is handsome. Vivian thinks about everything she has been through because of her fiancé, so she simply can't forgive him just like that. Seeming lost in her thoughts again, she only wakes when her fiancé calls for her. Aslan now has both hands on her face, making their gazes meet. He says he will do anything she wants. And with that, he pleads for her forgiveness. Vivian can't help but look surprised. She had never imagined he would go so far. Calmly, the protagonist calls his name, preparing for what comes next. Fully confident, she asks to make sure. Does he really mean he will do everything she asks? Because this is simply an opportunity she cannot miss. After all the trouble she went through walking on eggshells around Aslan, it is only fair he pays her back. The big smile stamped on the protagonist's face at this great and joyful news ends up fading. She looks at her fiancé, who has the face of an abandoned puppy. His gaze also seems sad and at the same time gentle, and that seems to shake Vivian a little. He looks terrible. It happens every time she sees his face like this. Her determination ends up weakening. After a long silence, the blonde clears her throat to break the tension and says, "Then tell me here and now exactly what you did wrong, without hiding any details." After a long sigh, Aslan says he nearly caused her a tremendous humiliation, and reveals he intended to come up with a better proposal, which prompts Vivian to scold him. The protagonist says that her whole life she has been surrounded by rumors spread by others, and questions whether he still doesn't understand why she is so angry. The silence that follows suggests he truly doesn't. But Aslan soon admits the whole thing was a matter between the two of them, yet he ended up following someone else's words, and goes on to admit that he didn't want to be considerate toward her. Aslan cups his beloved's face in his hands and says he is a fool, admitting she should have been the first person to know about the engagement ceremony. Vivian accepts his apology, understanding that her fiancé must feel uncomfortable with conversations like this, but says he handled it very well. But she is still not ready to forgive him, so she pulls away briskly. The protagonist reminds him there are 2 days left in the hunting tournament, and proposes that he bring her a very beautiful animal. Only then will she forgive him. And that is her plan, because even with Aslan's abilities, he wouldn't be capable of pulling something like that off in that time frame. This is her good way of getting even. Aslan says, "If I can earn your forgiveness, I would gladly give up the honor of victory." Even trying to hide it, the protagonist is completely beaming with this declaration and finds it a little excessive, so he decides to make a counter-proposal. The prince says that following the tradition of the hunting tournament, he asks whether she will give him a kiss if he is the winner. Vivian knows what he means. Aslan is referring to the tradition in which the winner of the hunting tournament offers the prize to his beloved and receives a kiss in front of everyone. Obviously, the protagonist finds this great audacity from someone who is the one seeking forgiveness, and besides, he needs to be sure he can win. But Vivian knows winning in 2 days is something impossible, so she ends up accepting, and soon those 2 days pass and it is the last day of the hunting tournament. The young men and everyone around them are stunned by what lies before them. Fallen on the ground is an enormous bear, weighing roughly 4,500 kilograms. Many whisper that the Archduke is in a league of his own, not to mention it's impressive given that he caught a huge white stag a few days ago, so no one would be surprised if he is announced as the tournament's winner. Speaking of him, the Archduke Astaroth finally makes his appearance. Everyone salutes his triumphant entrance, impressed by his outstanding performance, and this is not a good moment for the protagonist, who is completely doomed. While Aslan is up at the altar receiving all the glory, Vivian knows it's too early to give up. She is ready to put her specialty in escaping into practice. But before she could do that, Aslan announces her name, saying he would like to bestow this honor upon his one and only true fiancé. The Archduke walks toward her. He asks if she forgives him now. Vivian knows how very arrogant it was, but a deal is a deal, and so she turns around ready to pay her debt. Before she can do so, Aslan makes her pause for a moment and asks why she is pressing her lips together so hard. The protagonist can't help being in a state of panic, saying she can't help it because she has never done this before, apart from a kiss on the cheek. She whispers that there are many people watching, so she fears that if they do it wrong, it will only worsen their reputation. But soon Aslan silences her with a kiss. And Vivian does nothing more than return it, seeming to lose all the fear she had. Her hands tremble, but soon she finds her confidence and embraces him. With that, everyone will see their engagement is solid. Vivian thinks that should be enough, but she can't understand why her heart is beating so strangely. When the kiss ends, Aslan asks if she is all right. Despite confirming it, the girl looks away, certain it must be due to the festive atmosphere. From the attempted poisoning of the Empress to Aslan's new hunting record. And so the tournament finally came to an end, amid thunderous applause from the crowd. After that, they returned to Blackford, and all the protagonist longed for was a peaceful and tranquil life, as if recovering from wounds suffered in the grave. At least that was what she had hoped. Vivian is seated in her chair reading a paper that appears to be something very important, surrounded by many people all talking among themselves. One of the men announces that His Highness has ordered the floors and walls of the banquet hall to be replaced, while another speaks of having arranged for even the chandeliers and windows of the room to follow the latest trends. Basically, Vivian is being pestered by these men wanting her to take a look at their catalogs. And she wonders why she has to deal with this madness the moment she gets back. Ever since returning from the capital, she has had no time to rest because of her 18th birthday and the coming-of-age ceremony that are approaching. Many people are at the door. Jesus, who arrives, notices the madam appears to be a little busy, but he needs to speak with her urgently. Even with so many visitors at Blackford, that will only make it easier for the mage to slip in unnoticed. And with his tricks, the man wonders whether Vivian will recognize him this time. Meanwhile, they are trying to push catalogs of the finest imported pieces on the protagonist. She finds it all so overwhelming, she expected to simply smile and endure it, but it seems she doesn't have much of a choice. Fortunately, the protagonist has a card up her sleeve. After the dreadful sounds of coughing are heard, her guards come to her asking if she needs to call the imperial physician. But Vivian assures them she just needs to rest a little. Dylan attends to her wish, saying he will send the merchants back the next day, though she wishes they would never come back. Everyone begins to withdraw, and so the protagonist can finally breathe in peace. But she is soon surprised to find someone still there. A platinum-haired boy with large violet eyes introduces himself as an employee of Madame Scarlet's boutique. He says he is there to take her measurements for the dress she ordered. Dylan whispers, asking if he should send the boy away too. But Vivian, with a serious look, asks him to wait. There is a brooch on the boy's clothing that she remembers seeing before, and she quickly realizes it is the Eye of Truth that Jesus likes to wear. She takes a good look at the boy. Without a doubt, it is the master of the mages in disguise. Meanwhile, Dylan tries to kick the little rascal out. Vivian tells the guard that she called the boy and allows him to come up with her. She says the waiting time at Madame Scarlet's boutique is very long, so this is a small price to pay. Dylan simply accepts this and warns her to call him if anything is needed. Soon the two of them arrive in the room and can be at ease being alone. Vivian remarks that she didn't expect him to come in person, especially in this disguise. Jesus goes straight to the point, saying the residual demonic energy gave him quite a headache, and says that the Archduke protects her as if she were a rare treasure. With a smile, he says, "What mage could slip past him other than me?" But as for her, Jesus knew she would unmask him immediately, and Vivian realizes he is still just as insufferable as always. The protagonist asks whether his coming in person means he has found a way to break the black magic. However, Jesus is there to warn her it will take longer, as he has encountered an unexpected obstacle, which is surprising since Vivian imagined it wouldn't be a problem. There is something the mage would like to know. He noticed that the demon Astaroth seems to be connected to the black magic inscribed on her. Jesus wants to trace it to its origin and asks the girl if anything comes to mind. The inverted pentagram she saw in Aslan in his lion form looks very much like what is on her chest, but the problem is that it doesn't match the description in the original novel. From what is known, this requires a bond between a beast and a human, and since she never met that condition, she wouldn't be able to have one. But Jesus said the magic circle is suppressing the tuberculosis, and she has truly noticed that her symptoms have decreased. If this is not a coincidence and those bound by an impression share a life expectancy, she cannot rule out the possibility that this is one of those situations. And so Vivian's mind works through it, realizing that if this magic circle is an impression, she will not die before Aslan. But if the man dies, she will go with him. At the moment, she doesn't have enough information about the magic circle, but fortunately it seems Jesus knows something, so she will have to investigate a little further. But the protagonist is no fool, and she must be subtle and pretend she knows nothing. She says she has absolutely no idea when this magic circle formed and asks if he came all the way there just to ask her that. With a smile, the protagonist says, "I thought you were confident. Do you think throwing out hints like that will get you anywhere?" Jesus regrets that nothing comes to mind. The mage says that in that case, she also probably doesn't know that the demon Astaroth is plotting something against House Eleonora, and that truly catches the protagonist off guard. Jesus continues, recalling what he said about the black magic on her still being incomplete. He says the reason for that is her pure Eleonora blood, which prevented the magic from taking full effect. Jesus explains that two types of black magic cannot be inscribed at the same time, which at least worked in her favor because it remained incomplete. The protagonist's mother was of the direct lineage of House Eleonora, while her father is from a distant branch. But regardless, Vivian is no longer merely reading the novel, she is living it. This is quite unsettling because in her attempt to provoke Jesus, the whole thing ended up turning against her. Vivian finds the mage so irritating. Especially in this form, he is just another little brat. Suddenly, someone begins knocking on the door. The girl imagines it must be Aslan and asks Jesus to hide, but the mage is smarter than that, using the measuring tape to actually take her measurements. It truly is Aslan, who enters the room right away and wants to know how her health is. He had come quickly after hearing from Dylan that she was coughing. He finds only a perfectly ordinary scene, his fiancée having her measurements taken. Jesus whispers to Vivian that he could sense the prince coming because of the residual demonic energy, and tells her not to worry since the prince won't notice anything. Aslan knows he is the Batik's assistant and asks the little rascal what he was whispering. Staying in character, Jesus simply says they were the measurements. The dark-haired man knew someone would come for this purpose, but had expected it to be a woman. A little suspiciously, he bombards the boy with questions. Jesus introduces himself as Miguel, 16 years old. Still serious, Aslan asks whether the Batik is so short-staffed that a boy has to be sent to take a lady's measurements. The boy explains that Madame Scarlet has many assistants, but he is the only one assigned to noble ladies, because they prefer a cute and charming boy like him, and that is the Batik's trade secret. Which is not entirely a lie, and Vivian is simply amazed that the mage is so skilled at acting and improvising. But looking at her fiancé, she realizes he doesn't look the least bit pleased. And so a question rises in her mind. Does Aslan know it's Jesus? If that is truly the case, things are about to get dangerous. Vivian gives that look that clearly says, "Get out of here, Jesus." Finally reading the signal, little Miguel says that if there is nothing more he would like to know, he should be on his way. The protagonist lets out a sigh of anticipatory relief that everything went smoothly, but her heart races again when Jesus calls her name, and she just wants him to leave already. He simply smiles, warning that they will meet again soon, and asks her to take care of herself until then. And so Jesus leaves. With a nervous smile, Vivian asks if the boy isn't adorable, but Aslan says nothing, only staring seriously at the door through which the boy left, and asking, "Is that him?" Now alone, the dark-haired man is somewhat scolding her, saying that even though it is her coming-of-age celebration, she shouldn't be pushing herself so hard, and even offers to take over all the preparations. Gently, Vivian declines, saying it is her party, and besides, he must be busy with his own work. The protagonist has been sensing that her fiancé is being considerably more gentle than usual lately, and this makes her suspicious, even more so when he simply carries her to the bed. Aslan insists that his fiancée needs to rest and take care of her fragile health. He says that what matters is not the celebration, but her. With a smile, Vivian says he should take care of himself too, and that simple question makes the prince freeze. Aslan has absolutely no idea how to respond. The protagonist asks if he is perhaps shy, so she kind of tries to teach him, saying he should simply respond with something like, "Thank you for your concern." Aslan is a quick learner and gently holding her hand repeats what he was taught. "Thank you for your concern." Even though she finds it rather embarrassing, Vivian congratulates him on having taken such a big step. After that, the Archduke leaves the room. He seems to be recovering from what just happened. He is truly not accustomed to things like that. But the strange part is that he doesn't feel bad, and he has only Vivian to thank for slowly changing him. Aslan then thinks about how long Vivian has been there. He recalls when he first arrived at Blackford some 15 years ago. To be honest, he was expelled and sent there. And the atmosphere of that time was certainly nothing like it is now. Bitter snowstorms, that is what the weathered and isolated castle was known as, filled with the persistent smell of his own vital fluid. Johannes kept reminding him that the place was perfect for a filthy beast like him. But now there are signs of Vivian in every corner, and so the question remains, when will she be able to conquer this vast castle? His silence is interrupted by Diego, who appears suddenly. The butler has simply come to deliver another letter sent by Johannes. Aslan is a little irritated that his brother is clinging to an empty response his fiancée gave out of pure courtesy. He doesn't even want to bother reading it and asks for it to be torn up. But Diego is afraid that if they keep doing this, it could lead to worse consequences. He suggests that Vivian write a letter declining the invitation, but Aslan prefers to handle it personally. The dark-haired man recalls that his fiancée is ill and politely asks that she not be troubled with trivialities. Meanwhile, Vivian is alone in her room. She thinks about Aslan, who was wounded in the sacred forest not long ago, and yet is throwing himself into sword training and official work, which must be causing tremendous strain on his body. So she truly wishes the young man would take care of his health. This makes Vivian wonder if it was this very nature that led him to surrender himself to the demon without a second thought in the original story. The protagonist will not let that happen, since it would mean that if Aslan dies, she goes too. That's why she needs to come up with a solid plan if she wants to live. If her memory is correct, 3 years from now, Aslan will face his brother in a final battle, by which point Johannes will have become emperor. So Vivian has to find a way for Aslan to win before that and place him on the throne. Thinking about it, this is not entirely impossible. Her fiancé possesses overwhelming military strength, not to mention revenue from the mana stone mines that rivals the state treasury, and outstanding skill with a magic sword. The real problem is that he is not at all popular among the other nobles. This makes Vivian despair about what to do to repair his reputation. It's almost like trying to change the tide. But her mind lights up because there is actually a way. There really is. Vivian thinks, if repairing Aslan's reputation proves too difficult, wouldn't it be easier to bring down the enemy? There is no guarantee Jesus will find a countermeasure within 3 years, so she needs to protect her own life. But she must go to Prince Johannes first, which means she will probably need to use that method again. Morning comes, and this time it is a turbulent one. Vivian collapses to the floor from coughing so hard and is supported by the servants. Breathing has become so difficult. Dylan is so attentive, he says she only has to say the word and he will do everything in his power. The guard is truly willing to do that. Vivian asks the young man to come closer and whispers in his ear, "I need you to prepare a carriage for me without Aslan knowing," explaining that she is going to the imperial palace. She explains that the prince is going to introduce her to a physician who knows how to cure tuberculosis, and that she was going to decline, but with this unbearable pain, her plans have changed. This request makes Dylan hesitate, and he ends up revealing that they are also trying to make contact with this physician. Vivian is surprised, and the young man explains they didn't hide it out of ill intent. It's just that His Highness simply wished to proceed with greater care. This was truly unexpected, and it would be problematic if Aslan reached the false physician before her. She needs to ensure the man becomes a subordinate of Johannes. Reputation works like a seesaw. When one falls, the other rises. When the false doctor's scheme is exposed to the public, it will be a devastating blow to the crown prince. So she really does need to go to the imperial palace first. Vivian assures him she will explain everything to Aslan eventually and pleads that she must go to the imperial palace immediately. The girl begins coughing again, which worries him greatly, and the young man has no other option but to accept. Johannes is delighted to see her again. The young man says he was starting to feel slighted, since she never replied to his invitation. Vivian apologizes, and secretly we all know very well why. The protagonist goes straight to the point, saying she is there to ask a favor. She says that from what she understands, he knows the whereabouts of the physician who can cure her tuberculosis. Without playing games, Johannes asks if she intends to meet him personally. Vivian confirms it and adds that her condition has worsened to the point of desperately needing a recovery. The blonde falls into thought. He says she won't need to find him personally. He reveals he intends to bring the man to the capital and recommend him as an imperial physician. He asks if that wouldn't be far more convenient for her. And making quite a tense face, Vivian asks if he would really go to all that trouble for her. The girl seems tense rather than happy, so Johannes asks if something has happened. Vivian raises her gaze and says she is deeply grateful for his consideration, but that she is concerned about the other patients. After all, he is a physician capable of curing many terminal illnesses, and by becoming an imperial physician, others may no longer receive his care. Her words give the crown prince pause. The protagonist is not wrong in her thinking. If the palace monopolizes a physician of that caliber, not even the imperial family, let alone her, will escape criticism. Johannes interrupts his scheming, saying he understands her point. He then puts forward his best proposal. What if I recommend him as an imperial physician but assign his position to the Minerva Public Hospital? It seems Vivian won't need to think too hard about how to solve that problem because the mission appears to be a success. The Minerva Public Hospital is a luxury medical facility used primarily by the upper class. Since its patience wields so much influence in society, the praise for Johannes will only grow, but when the truth is revealed, it will come crashing down. Vivian thanks the prince for this, and he asks her not to mention it, wishing her a swift recovery. He says they will speak again soon when she is better. Shortly after that conversation, the lady returns to the second prince's palace. Vivian feels completely relieved that it went well, and now all she needs to do is wait. In any case, that physician would never refuse an offer from Johannes. Dylan pulls her from her thoughts by calling her name. The young man is nervous and already apologizes for what he is about to say next, which is that the crown prince and his master don't get along. Vivian knows this very well, especially because the reason is the Astaroth curse. Dylan says it would be wiser for her to tell her fiancé. The protagonist knows the young man is right. It would be very easy for Aslan to suspect something is happening between her and his brother. She thanks him for his concern and promises she will explain everything. That is enough to put the young man at ease again. All she can do is place her faith in him for now. Time passes and Vivian is alone in her room, but not for long since Aslan soon announces his arrival. The two of them stand face to face. After that, the engaged couple sits on the bed and an awkward silence falls between them. And Vivian finds it strange that her man is so quiet, already suspecting that Dylan may have said something he shouldn't have. Until Aslan breaks the silence by saying, "It's unbearable." The girl immediately begins to lament, imagining things are doomed, but Aslan continues saying, "You have been fighting so hard and I have failed to give you my faith." He says Dylan told him what happened earlier, but that only leaves the blonde a little confused. Aslan wants her to blame him for it, but deep down he is so ashamed he can't even look at her. Okay, so the silence was because of his guilt. At least Dylan smoothed the way for her. Vivian says she is the one who should apologize for having sought out the crown prince out of pure selfishness. But Aslan truly sees no problem with it. He wants her to care about seeking whatever is best for herself. She smiles, thanking him, and assures him she will recover. Even without saying anything, Aslan is so at peace. The young man then reaches out to touch her face, and Vivian finds herself grateful that he understood her so well. But she simply cannot understand. Even though things turned out as she wanted, she feels rather on edge. She also can't understand why her mind keeps returning to that moment. Lost in her thoughts, she is woken by her beloved calling her name. Aslan now has both hands on her face, making their gazes meet. Okay, so that's everything we've covered so far, and that's not what my will said, all the way up to chapter 34, and honestly, I have so many thoughts. First of all, Vivian is just such a refreshing main character. She's not trying to be the hero. She literally just wants to survive and mind her business, and somehow keeps getting pulled into every single major event anyway. The way she handles everything with this very calm, calculated energy while internally freaking out, so relatable, honestly. And the plot twists with the impression mark, the black magic, Jesus showing up in those ridiculous disguises, there's so much going on and it's genuinely keeping me on my toes. I love that the story is smarter than it looks at first. We still have so much ahead. I need to know what happens with Johannes, with the cure, with all of it. So if you want to follow along, make sure you're subscribed and leave a like if you're enjoying the recaps. It genuinely means a lot and keeps me going. Kisses and see you next time.